Chapter 1: The Awakening. The village of Eldridge had always been a quiet place, nestled deep in the forests of northern England. Its isolation was both a blessing and a curse. To outsiders, it was a quaint relic of a bygone era, with cobblestone streets and Tudor-style cottages. But for those who lived there, it was a sanctuary from the encroaching modern world, a world that, it seemed, had begun to intrude upon their peaceful existence in ways they could scarcely understand. It was a chilly autumn evening when the first signs of something truly malevolent began to surface. The leaves had turned a fiery red and orange, and the village square was adorned with the colors of fall. Father Thomas O'Connor, the local priest, had been called to the village to address what the townsfolk had initially dismissed as simple superstitions. The first incident was reported by Mrs. Abigail Carter, an elderly woman who lived alone in a small cottage at the edge of the village. She claimed to have heard strange noises throughout the night, guttural growls and anguished screams that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. She had tried to brush it off as a bad dream, or perhaps the result of her own deteriorating health. But when her cat was found dead, its body contorted in a grotesque manner, she knew something was wrong. Father Thomas, a man of reason and faith, had traveled from his parish in the city to investigate. His arrival was met with a mixture of hope and fear. The villagers gathered at the small church, their faces etched with worry and confusion. They described the noises Abigail had heard and spoke of an oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the village in recent weeks. Father Thomas listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. He had seen his share of strange occurrences during his years of service, but nothing that could not be explained away by natural causes. However, the gravity in the villagers' voices and the seriousness of Abigail's account compelled him to take their fears seriously. The village church was ancient, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. Father Thomas conducted a brief inspection, noting the heavy silence that seemed to pervade the building. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the village, Father Thomas retired to his small quarters in the rectory. He had intended to spend the night in prayer, seeking guidance on how best to approach the situation. However, sleep eluded him. The sounds of the village, murmured conversations, distant footsteps, and the occasional creak of an old building seemed unusually loud in the stillness of the night. Around midnight, a loud crash jolted Father Thomas awake. He hurriedly dressed and made his way outside, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He followed the sound to Abigail's cottage, where a small crowd had gathered. The front door was ajar, and the villagers looked on with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Inside the cottage, the scene was horrifying. Furniture was overturned, and the walls were smeared with what appeared to be blood, though upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a dark, sticky substance that was neither red nor easily identifiable. In the middle of the room lay Abigail, her body twisted, and her eyes wide open in a frozen expression of terror. Her cat, once a loyal companion, had been mutilated and placed in a grotesque display on the mantelpiece. Father Thomas's heart sank as he surveyed the scene. The evidence of torture was clear, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. It was as if something had invaded the very soul of the house, leaving a trail of horror in its wake. As he knelt beside Abigail's body, he could not shake the feeling of being watched. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. He murmured a prayer for the deceased, hoping to bring some semblance of peace to the troubled soul. The villagers gathered outside, their whispers growing louder as they debated the significance of the events. Some believed it was the work of a vengeful spirit or an evil entity, while others thought it might be the act of a disturbed individual. Father Thomas knew that to provide answers, he needed to delve deeper into the village's history and uncover any potential connections to the supernatural. The following day, Father Thomas began his investigation in earnest. He interviewed the villagers, piecing together any information that might shed light on the recent disturbances. One name kept coming up, a local man named Richard Blackwood, who had been rumored to dabble in occult practices. Richard was a reclusive figure who lived in a dilapidated farmhouse on the outskirts of the village. His reputation as an eccentric had made him a target of gossip and suspicion, but Father Thomas approached him with an open mind, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. The farmhouse was dark and foreboding, its windows boarded up and its garden overgrown with weeds. As Father Thomas approached the front door, he noticed strange symbols carved into the wood. They appeared to be ancient runes, though their meaning was unclear. Richard answered the door with a wary expression, his eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and defiance. He welcomed Father Thomas inside, though he was clearly uncomfortable with the visit. The interior of the farmhouse was cluttered with books, candles, and strange artifacts. Richard's demeanor was guarded as he spoke of his interest in the occult and his belief in ancient rites and rituals. He denied any involvement in the recent events, but his knowledge of dark practices and his unsettling demeanor made Father Thomas wary. As the investigation continued, the villagers grew increasingly desperate. They pleaded with Father Thomas to find answers and protect them from the malevolent force that seemed to be wreaking havoc on their lives. The sense of dread in the village was palpable, and Father Thomas knew that he had to act quickly to prevent further tragedy. Late one evening, as Father Thomas was poring over old records and local legends, he came across a reference to a dark entity that had been mentioned in ancient texts. The entity was said to be a demon that thrived on fear and suffering, feeding off the souls of its victims to gain strength. The description matched the recent events in Eldridge almost too perfectly. Determined to confront the entity, Father Thomas consulted with experts on demonology and ancient rites. He learned that the demon, known as Azazel, was a powerful and malevolent being that could not be easily banished. The texts warned of its ability to manipulate and torment its victims, growing stronger with each soul it consumed. With this knowledge, Father Thomas began preparations for a ritual that might help banish Azazel and protect the village. He gathered the necessary components and prepared himself mentally and spiritually for the confrontation. But as the days passed, the demon's influence seemed to grow stronger, and the village's situation became increasingly dire. The final confrontation would be a battle of wills and faith, with the fate of the village hanging in the balance. Father Thomas was resolute in his determination to protect the innocent and bring an end to the terror that had gripped Eldridge. Chapter 2. First Blood. The first rays of dawn pierced through the heavy clouds that had gathered over Eldridge, casting a muted light on the village below. The chill in the air was sharp, a stark reminder of the encroaching winter. Father Thomas had spent the night in uneasy contemplation, his mind racing with the horrors he had witnessed and the knowledge he had gained. He knew that time was of the essence if he was to prevent further suffering. The village was unusually quiet as Father Thomas made his way to the center of town. The previous night's events had left the community in shock, and many villagers had retreated to their homes, too frightened to venture out. The few who remained were huddled in small groups, their conversations low and filled with apprehension. Father Thomas headed to the village square, where he was to meet with Constable Peter Hayes, who had been assigned to investigate Abigail Carter's death. Peter was a solid, dependable man with a keen sense of duty, but even he was visibly shaken by the events. His face was drawn and pale, and his eyes held a mixture of fear and frustration. "Father Thomas," Peter greeted him with a nod, "we've got another problem." "What do you mean?" Father Thomas asked, his heart sinking. "We've had another incident," Peter said, leading Father Thomas to the edge of the village, where a small crowd had gathered. "This one's even worse." The crowd parted as they approached, revealing a sight that made Father Thomas's stomach churn. In a secluded corner of the village, near a dense thicket, lay the body of a young woman. Her name was Emily Dawson, a schoolteacher who was beloved by the villagers. Her body was arranged in a grotesque tableau, her limbs splayed out in unnatural angles, and her face frozen in a rictus of agony. Father Thomas knelt beside the body, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The scene was far more disturbing than Abigail Carter's death. The signs of torture were unmistakable, and the manner in which Emily had been displayed suggested a deliberate and perverse enjoyment of her suffering. Peter looked on with grim determination. We don't have any suspects, and no one saw or heard anything unusual. It's like the killer, or whatever it is, moves through the village unseen. Father Thomas stood up, his mind racing. This isn't just a random act of violence. It's something more, something darker. We're dealing with a force that's feeding on fear and pain. Peter nodded. We're at a loss. The village is in turmoil, and people are scared. They're talking about old legends and supernatural forces. As the constable spoke, Father Thomas's thoughts turned to Richard Blackwood, the reclusive man with knowledge of occult practices. He had been suspicious from the start, but now his involvement seemed more likely. Father Thomas resolved to confront Richard again, hoping to gain further insights into the nature of the entity they were facing. Before he could leave, Peter grabbed his arm. Father Thomas, there's something else. The village elder, Mr. Thompson, claims to have seen something strange in the old church. He says it might be related to the recent events. Father Thomas's interest was piqued. The old church had been abandoned for years, a relic of a bygone era. It was said to be cursed, and few dared to go near it. If there was any truth to Mr. Thompson's claims, it could provide a crucial clue. With a sense of grim determination, Father Thomas set off for the old church. The building loomed ahead, its once proud structure now in a state of disrepair. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. The air around the church felt heavy, as if it were charged with an otherworldly presence. As Father Thomas stepped inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The interior was cloaked in shadows, with only the faint light filtering through the broken windows to illuminate the decaying space. The scent of mold and decay was overpowering, mingling with an underlying sense of malevolence. Father Thomas carefully made his way through the dust-covered pews and broken altar, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He moved slowly, his senses on high alert for any sign of the presence that had been tormenting the village. Mr. Thompson, an elderly man with a weathered face, was waiting near the altar. His eyes were wide with fear as he pointed to a corner of the church. There, he whispered, his voice trembling. I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it was unnatural. It left something behind. Father Thomas approached the area, and his flashlight revealed a series of strange symbols scrawled on the floor. The symbols were intricate and unfamiliar, their meaning unclear, but their presence undeniably unsettling. They resembled the runes Richard Blackwood had mentioned, reinforcing Father Thomas's suspicion that the reclusive man had more knowledge of these dark forces than he had let on. This is important, Father Thomas said, examining the symbols closely. We need to decipher these and understand what they mean. They could be related to the entity we're dealing with. Mr. Thompson nodded, his face pale. I'll do whatever I can to help, Father, but you need to be careful. There's something evil in this place. As Father Thomas left the old church, he felt the weight of the village's fear pressing down on him. The symbols were a clue, but they also indicated a deeper and more dangerous connection to the dark forces at work. He knew that finding answers would require more than just investigating. It would require confronting the very essence of the evil that had taken root in Eldridge. Back at his quarters, Father Thomas delved into his research, studying ancient texts and consulting with experts on occult symbols. The process was slow and painstaking, but he was determined to uncover the truth. The village's safety, and perhaps even his own, depended on his ability to understand and combat the malevolent entity that had been unleashed. As night fell, Father Thomas felt the oppressive presence of the demon growing stronger. The village was quiet, but the silence was filled with a sense of impending dread. He knew that the next step in their fight against the darkness would be critical. The entity's power was growing, and with each passing moment, the village's situation grew more dire. With resolve stealing in his heart, Father Thomas prepared for the challenges ahead. The path to banishing the demon would be fraught with danger, but he was determined to protect the innocent and end the reign of terror that had gripped Eldridge. Chapter 3. Ritual of the Damned. The autumn wind howled through the trees, carrying with it an unsettling chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of Eldridge. The village was gripped by a deepening fear, and the shadows that once danced benignly in the corners of their homes now seemed to lurk with sinister intent. Father Thomas had spent days poring over ancient texts, attempting to decipher the symbols found in the old church. The task was arduous, but he was determined to unravel the mystery behind the entity that plagued the village. The symbols, he discovered, were part of an ancient summoning ritual, a method used to call forth demonic entities by binding their essence to the earthly plane. Each symbol was a fragment of a larger spell, and together they formed a dark web of magical energy that could both summon and empower the demon. The more symbols that were activated, the stronger the demon would become, feeding off the fear and suffering of its victims. Father Thomas's growing sense of urgency was matched by the increasing despair among the villagers. They spoke in hushed tones about the horrifying events that had occurred, their eyes darting nervously at every shadow. It was clear that the demon's presence was not only physical, but psychological, manipulating and tormenting the villagers to amplify their terror. Late one night, as Father Thomas was preparing to consult with Richard Blackwood, he received an urgent knock on his door. Constable Peter Hayes stood on the threshold, his face grim and his eyes reflecting the deep concern that had taken root in the village. "Father, we have a situation," Peter said, his voice heavy with dread. "Another body was found. It's worse than the others." Father Thomas's heart sank. He gathered his belongings quickly and followed Peter to the scene of the latest atrocity. As they approached, the stench of decay and the oppressive atmosphere grew stronger. The village's few remaining lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the buildings. The scene was a gruesome tableau of horror. The victim, a young man named Thomas Reed, had been found in the village square, his body mutilated and arranged in a grotesque pattern that seemed to mock the very essence of humanity. His limbs were twisted in unnatural positions, and his face was contorted in a silent scream of agony. Father Thomas's stomach churned as he took in the scene. The brutality of the demon's actions was evident, but the arrangement of the body spoke of a deeper, more twisted intent. It was as if the demon was not only feeding on fear, but also reveling in the power it derived from the chaos it had wrought. "We can't keep doing this," Peter said, his voice strained. "We need to find a way to stop it, or we'll lose everyone." Father Thomas nodded solemnly. "We need to act quickly. The demon is growing stronger with each soul it consumes. We have to find a way to counteract its power." With renewed determination, Father Thomas returned to his quarters. He needed to find a solution to banish the demon before it was too late. The texts he had studied indicated that a specific relic, a biblical artifact of immense power, was required to perform the banishment ritual. However, the location of this relic was shrouded in mystery. As he prepared for another visit to Richard Blackwood, Father Thomas found himself reflecting on the nature of evil and the strength required to confront it. The demon, with its insatiable hunger for fear and suffering, was a manifestation of pure malevolence. To combat it, he needed not only knowledge and faith, but also an unwavering resolve. Richard Blackwood's farmhouse loomed ahead, its darkened windows and overgrown garden a stark contrast to the village's dimly lit streets. Father Thomas approached cautiously, knowing that the reclusive man's knowledge of occult practices might hold the key to defeating the demon. Richard answered the door with a wary expression, his eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Father Thomas," he said, "what brings you here again?" "I need your help," Father Thomas said, his voice resolute. "The situation has worsened, and we need to find the relic mentioned in the texts. It's the only way to banish the demon." Richard's eyes widened. "You're dealing with Azazel, aren't you? The relic you seek is not something to be taken lightly. It is said to be hidden in a place of great significance, protected by powerful wards and ancient magic." Father Thomas leaned in, his gaze intense. "Tell me what you know. Every moment we waste is a moment the demon grows stronger." Richard hesitated before speaking. "The relic is known as the Sanctus Crucis, a holy cross imbued with divine power. It is said to be kept in an ancient cathedral, long forgotten and hidden from the world. The cathedral is rumored to be located in the heart of the forest, beyond the village's boundaries." Father Thomas took note of the information. If we can locate this cathedral, we might have a chance to obtain the relic and perform the banishment ritual. Richard nodded slowly. Be cautious, Father. The cathedral is said to be guarded by more than just physical barriers. It is a place of great power, and the forces that protect it are formidable. With Richard's information in hand, Father Thomas made preparations for the journey into the forest. He knew that finding the cathedral and retrieving the Sanctus Crucis would be a perilous task, but it was a risk he had to take. The lives of the villagers, and perhaps his own, depended on it. As he gathered supplies and prepared to leave, Peter Hayes arrived with a look of grim determination. I'm coming with you, Peter said. We need to find that relic and end this nightmare. Father Thomas appreciated the constable's bravery and agreed to the plan. Together, they set out into the dense forest, following the vague directions Richard had provided. The journey was arduous, with the forest seeming to close in around them. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare them. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig seemed to echo with an eerie significance. The forest seemed to be alive with malevolent intent, as if it were a part of the demon's influence. After hours of trekking through the dense undergrowth, Father Thomas and Peter arrived at a clearing. In the center stood the remnants of a once grand cathedral, its crumbling facade barely visible through the overgrown foliage. The structure was covered in vines and moss, and the grandeur of its past was now obscured by the passage of time. Father Thomas approached the cathedral with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The Sanctus Crucis was said to be hidden within, protected by ancient magic. The air around the cathedral was charged with an otherworldly energy, and Father Thomas could feel the weight of the power that emanated from the structure. As they entered the cathedral, the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. The interior was a labyrinth of shadow and decay, with towering columns and broken stained glass windows casting distorted patterns on the floor. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional flutter of unseen creatures. Father Thomas and Peter navigated the cathedral's interior, their flashlight revealing faded murals and inscriptions that spoke of the cathedral's once sacred purpose. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the cathedral itself were alive with a dark and malevolent presence. In the heart of the cathedral, they found an altar shrouded in darkness. Atop the altar lay a hidden compartment, its surface covered in dust and grime. Father Thomas carefully opened the compartment, revealing an ornate box adorned with intricate carvings and symbols. With reverent hands, Father Thomas opened the box, and inside lay the Sanctus Crucis, a gleaming cross imbued with a divine light that seemed to push back the darkness around them. The sight of the relic filled him with a sense of hope and resolve. As Father Thomas and Peter prepared to leave the cathedral, the atmosphere grew heavier. The demon's presence was palpable, and the sense of malevolence seemed to intensify. The cathedral was not a passive observer, but an active participant in the struggle between light and darkness. With the Sanctus Crucis in their possession, Father Thomas and Peter made their way back to the village. The journey was fraught with danger, as the forest seemed to conspire against them. The shadows shifted and moved with a malevolent intent, and the feeling of being watched was inescapable. Finally, they emerged from the forest and returned to the village. The sight of the familiar surroundings brought a sense of relief, but the danger was far from over. The Sanctus Crucis was a powerful tool, but using it would require a ritual of immense concentration and faith. Father Thomas knew that the final confrontation with the demon would be the most challenging yet. The village was counting on him, and he could not afford to fail. The demon's influence had already claimed too many lives, and he was determined to end its reign of terror once and for all. Chapter 4. Descent into Darkness. The village of Eldridge had become a somber place, its once lively streets now a testament to the terror that had gripped it. Father Thomas and Constable Peter Hayes arrived back with the Sanctus Crucis, their spirits bolstered by the sacred relic. but their faces etched with the fatigue of their perilous journey. The weight of their task pressed heavily on them as they prepared for the final confrontation with the demon that had cast its shadow over their lives. As dusk fell, the village seemed to hold its breath, a collective pause in the midst of despair. Father Thomas knew that performing the banishment ritual required not only the Sanctus Crucis, but also a place of sanctity, where the forces of light could contend against the darkness. The old church, with its desolate and forsaken aura, seemed an appropriate location, though it carried its own risks. Father Thomas and Peter made their way to the church, their path illuminated by flickering lanterns and the occasional beam of moonlight breaking through the clouds. The church loomed ahead, its weathered walls and broken windows a stark reminder of the evil that had taken root within its confines. Inside the church, Father Thomas and Peter prepared the altar for the ritual. The air was thick with anticipation, and every creak of the wooden floor seemed to echo with an ominous significance. The relic, the Sanctus Crucis, lay prominently on the altar, its divine light casting a soft glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. Father Thomas began the ritual preparations, meticulously arranging the necessary components and reciting prayers of protection. The process was laborious but essential, each step designed to fortify their defenses and channel the power of the Sanctus Crucis against the demon. As the ritual commenced, the church was filled with a deep, resonant chant. Father Thomas's voice rose and fell with a rhythmic intensity, the prayers invoking divine protection and the power of the relic. The atmosphere became charged with spiritual energy, a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness that had engulfed the village. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a gust of wind swept through the church, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. Father Thomas's heart raced as he realized that the demon had arrived, drawn by the ritual's invocation. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the church, and the oppressive presence of the demon became palpable. Shadows seemed to writhe and twist on the walls, and a chilling laughter echoed through the empty space. The demon's power was overwhelming, and its influence threatened to break through the protective barriers Father Thomas had erected. Peter's flashlight flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The sense of dread was palpable, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the demon's malignant energy. Father Thomas pressed on with the ritual, his voice unwavering despite the mounting terror. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, and the walls of the church appeared to close in on them. The demon's laughter grew louder, a mocking and taunting sound that preyed on their fears. Father Thomas could feel the malevolent force pushing against the protective barriers, its power relentless and insidious. As the ritual reached its climax, Father Thomas invoked the Sanctus Crucis, holding it aloft with trembling hands. The relic's divine light flared brightly, pushing back the darkness and forcing the demon to recoil. The intensity of the light was overwhelming, and for a moment, the church was bathed in a blinding radiance. But the demon was not so easily vanquished. It roared in fury, its rage palpable as it struggled against the light. The shadows on the walls writhed and twisted, and the very foundation of the church seemed to tremble under the weight of the demon's malevolence. Despite Father Thomas's efforts, the ritual was not enough to fully banish the demon. The power of the Sanctus Crucis was immense, but the demon's influence was deeply entrenched, and it fought back with all the fury it could muster. The darkness in the church seemed to grow denser, and the light of the relic began to wane. The struggle between light and darkness reached a fever pitch, and Father Thomas knew that their situation was dire. The demon was too powerful, and its attempts to subvert the ritual were becoming more aggressive. The very essence of evil was fighting back with a savagery that was almost palpable. As the ritual faltered, Father Thomas realized that they needed more than just the relic. They needed a renewed focus and an unwavering resolve to combat the demon's power. The struggle was not just physical but also spiritual, and it required a level of faith and determination that went beyond mere ritualistic practices. Peter, seeing Father Thomas's determination, stepped forward to assist. Despite his fear, he took up a position beside the altar, his presence a symbol of solidarity and strength. Together, they redoubled their efforts, their voices rising in a united plea for divine intervention. The battle raged on, and the church seemed to be at the very center of a cosmic struggle between light and darkness. The walls shook, and the air was filled with a cacophony of sound as the demon's rage was unleashed. The Sanctus Crucis continued to shine, but its light was flickering, struggling against the encroaching shadows. The ritual reached a critical moment as Father Thomas invoked a final, powerful prayer. The words were spoken with a fervor born of desperation and faith, a last-ditch effort to force the demon back. The light of the relic flared one final time, pushing back the darkness with a forceful surge. But even as the demon was momentarily repelled, it was clear that the battle was far from over. The struggle had been fierce, but the demon's power remained, and the village of Eldridge was still under its malevolent influence. Father Thomas knew that they had only achieved a temporary respite, and that the fight to banish the demon was far from finished. As the church returned to its eerie silence, Father Thomas and Peter took a moment to catch their breath. The struggle had been exhausting, and the weight of their task was evident in their weary expressions. The Sanctus Crucis, though still glowing, had been tested to its limits, and its power was not infinite. "We've made some progress," Father Thomas said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "But we need to prepare for the next stage of the ritual. The demon is still here, and we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Peter nodded, his resolve unwavering. "We'll do whatever it takes to end this nightmare." Father Thomas and Peter left the church, their spirits bolstered by their small victory, but aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The demon's power was formidable, and the path to banishment was fraught with danger. They needed to find a way to strengthen their defenses and prepare for the final confrontation. As they made their way back to the village, the weight of their task hung heavily on their shoulders. The battle against the demon was far from over, and the struggle to protect the innocent and banish the darkness would require all of their strength and determination. Chapter 5. The Demon's Lair. The village of Eldridge lay shrouded in an uneasy silence as night fell once again. The dim glow of lanterns did little to dispel the pervasive sense of dread that had become a constant presence in the villagers' lives. Father Thomas and Constable Peter Hayes were resolute in their mission to end the reign of terror brought by the demon. They had successfully performed the initial ritual, but it had only bought them a brief respite. The true challenge lay ahead, and they knew they needed more than just the Sanctus Crucis to confront the demon. In the dim light of Father Thomas's study, the two men pored over ancient texts and maps, searching for any clues that might lead them to a more decisive solution. The text revealed that the demon had a lair, an ancient, hidden location where it drew its power and conducted its dark rituals. Finding this lair was crucial to understanding how to finally banish the demon. Hours passed, and the flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls as they studied the maps. The lair was said to be located in the deepest part of the forest, a place that was both remote and well guarded by the forces of darkness. It was described as a place where the veil between the mortal world and the infernal realms was thin, allowing the demon to draw upon immense power. Father Thomas and Peter knew that locating and infiltrating the lair would be perilous. The demon's stronghold was not merely a physical location, but a nexus of dark magic that would test their resolve and faith to their limits. They prepared for the journey with grim determination, knowing that it might be their last chance to confront the demon and end its reign of terror. As dawn broke, Father Thomas and Peter set out for the forest once again. They carried essential supplies, including the Sanctus Crucis, which they hoped would provide them with protection and guidance. The forest, though familiar, took on a new and foreboding aspect as they ventured deeper into its heart. The journey through the forest was arduous. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches intertwining to create a suffocating canopy. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of distant animals. The forest was unnervingly silent, as though it were holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. As they pressed on, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of menace, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. Father Thomas could feel the power of the demon growing stronger as they approached its lair, the air vibrating with an almost tangible energy. Hours turned into a tense and grueling trek. The forest seemed to twist and change around them, disorienting their sense of direction. Just when they began to doubt their bearings, they stumbled upon a clearing. At the center of the clearing was a massive stone structure, partially hidden by the dense undergrowth and twisted roots. The structure was a dark, foreboding fortress, its walls etched with ancient symbols and runes. The architecture was a stark contrast to the crumbling remains of the cathedral they had seen earlier. This was a place of dark power, and it exuded an aura of malevolence that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Father Thomas and Peter approached cautiously, their senses heightened. The fortress was surrounded by a barrier of dark energy, a shimmering field of malevolent magic that repelled any attempts to pass through. It was clear that the demon had gone to great lengths to protect its lair. "We need to find a way through," Father Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The barrier is formidable, but it may have a weak point we can exploit." Peter nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the fortress. "We need to be careful. The demon will be expecting us, and it will use every means at its disposal to keep us out." Father Thomas began to examine the symbols and runes on the fortress walls, looking for any clues that might indicate a way to bypass the barrier. The inscriptions were in an ancient language, one that he recognized from his studies but found difficult to interpret. As he worked, a chilling breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air grew heavy with the stench of rot. Father Thomas could feel the presence of the demon growing stronger, its influence seeping through the barrier. Suddenly, a low, resonant growl echoed through the clearing, and the shadows around the fortress seemed to coalesce into a dark, shifting mass. The demon's presence was palpable, and it was clear that it was aware of their approach. Father Thomas and Peter quickly moved to a concealed position behind a cluster of trees, trying to remain hidden from the demon's gaze. The fortress's barrier flickered and pulsed with an ominous energy, and the growling sound grew louder, echoing through the forest. The barrier seemed to respond to the demon's presence, its intensity increasing. Father Thomas realized that they needed to act quickly to avoid being detected. He focused on the inscriptions, hoping to decipher a means of penetrating the barrier. With intense concentration, he managed to make out a few words of an incantation that seemed to be linked to the barrier's magic. He relayed the information to Peter, who nodded in understanding. Together, they began to recite the incantation, hoping to weaken the barrier enough to gain entry. As they chanted, the barrier shimmered and wavered, its energy fluctuating in response to the incantation. The process was slow and grueling, and the demon's growls grew louder, more menacing. The air around them crackled with dark energy, and the forest seemed to close in around them. With a final surge of effort, the barrier flickered and gave way, creating a narrow opening through which Father Thomas and Peter could pass. They wasted no time, slipping through the gap and entering the fortress. Inside, the fortress was a labyrinth of dark corridors and chambers, each one filled with a palpable sense of malevolence. The walls were adorned with grotesque symbols and twisted carvings, and the air was thick with an oppressive, stifling heat. The fortress seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the dark energy flowing through its passages like a living entity. Father Thomas and Peter moved cautiously, their senses alert for any signs of danger. The Sanctus Crucis was their only source of light and protection, casting a dim, flickering glow as they ventured deeper into the fortress. The further they went, the more intense the feeling of dread became. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them through a series of nightmarish chambers filled with eerie, spectral apparitions and dark, shifting shadows. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the palpable sense of suffering. In one chamber, they encountered a series of groteffigies and twisted statues, each one representing a different form of torment. The sight was horrifying. a visual representation of the demon's sadistic nature and the suffering it had inflicted on its victims. Father Thomas and Peter pressed on, determined to reach the heart of the fortress and confront the demon. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Finally, they reached a massive, dimly lit chamber, its walls adorned with dark, ancient runes and symbols. At the center of the chamber was a raised altar, upon which lay a series of ritualistic artifacts and dark relics. The air was thick with a palpable sense of evil, and the demon's presence was overwhelming. Father Thomas and Peter approached the altar cautiously, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of the demon. The atmosphere was charged with dark energy, and the sense of impending doom was almost unbearable. As they neared the altar, the demon's voice echoed through the chamber, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to reverberate through their very souls. The voice was filled with malevolence, mocking and taunting them as they approached. "Fools," the demon's voice intoned. "You think you can defeat me? I am the darkness that dwells in the hearts of men. Your efforts are futile." Father Thomas and Peter stood their ground, their resolve unshaken by the demon's words. They knew that the final confrontation was imminent, and they were prepared to face whatever the demon had in store for them. With the Sanctus Crucis in hand, Father Thomas began to recite the final incantation, invoking the divine power of the relic and calling upon the forces of light to confront the darkness. The air crackled with energy, and the chamber was bathed in a blinding light as the ritual commenced. The demon roared in fury, its dark form writhing and contorting as it fought against the light. The chamber shook with the force of the struggle, and the walls seemed to close in, filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Despite the demon's efforts, the light of the Sanctus Crucis was unwavering, pushing back the darkness and forcing the demon to recoil. The battle was fierce, but Father Thomas and Peter's determination and faith were their greatest weapons. As the ritual reached its climax, the demon's form began to waver, its power faltering in the face of the Sanctus Crucis. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the demon's roars of anger and frustration echoed through the darkness. But even as the demon was pushed back, it was clear that the struggle was far from over. The demon's power was immense, and its influence was deeply entrenched. Father Thomas and Peter knew that they needed to be prepared for whatever came next, for the final confrontation with the demon was still ahead. Chapter 6. The Sacrifice of Innocence. The blinding light of the Sanctus Crucis began to wane, but the demon's rage did not abate. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes stood amidst the chaos of the fortress's heart, their faces illuminated by the erratic flickers of divine light that cast long, trembling shadows across the walls. The chamber itself seemed to pulse with an almost malevolent heartbeat, the very air vibrating with dark energy. Father Thomas's voice was hoarse from chanting, his eyes strained from the effort of maintaining the ritual. Peter stood by his side, the constable's face a mask of grim determination as he held the flashlight, its beam providing a narrow but crucial path of light through the encroaching darkness. Despite their efforts, it became clear that the Sanctus Crucis alone was not enough to defeat the demon. The power emanating from the relic was immense, but the demon's malevolence seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. The ritual was pushing the demon back, but it was a temporary measure, an uneasy stalemate in the ongoing battle between light and darkness. The chamber shook violently, and the altar on which the demon's dark relics lay trembled with the force of the struggle. The walls seemed to close in, the runes glowing ominously as the very fabric of the fortress was affected by the demon's rage. Suddenly, a chilling silence fell over the chamber, as though the demon was gathering its strength for a final devastating assault. Father Thomas and Peter exchanged worried glances, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The calm before the storm was palpable, and the tension was almost unbearable. A deep, resonant growl broke the silence, and the demon's voice echoed through the chamber, a cold and mocking tone that seemed to chill the very marrow of their bones. "You think you can defeat me with your petty rituals?" the demon taunted. "You do not understand the depths of my power. You have only scratched the surface." Father Thomas tightened his grip on the Sanctus Crucis, his eyes blazing with determination. "We will not be deterred by your threats. We have come too far to turn back now." As if in response to the demon's taunts, the chamber was suddenly filled with a blinding flash of light. The energy was overwhelming, and for a moment it seemed as though the demon might be driven back entirely. But the light quickly faded, leaving behind an eerie silence and an even darker presence. In the stillness that followed, Father Thomas and Peter noticed a disturbing change in the chamber. The dark relics on the altar began to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the runes on the walls glowed with an eerie, sickly light. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of impending doom, and the feeling of being watched was almost palpable. Then came the first sign of the demon's true power, a haunting cry, a scream that seemed to echo from the very depths of the abyss. The sound was filled with agony and despair, a chilling reminder of the demon's sadistic nature. Father Thomas and Peter's hearts sank as they realized what was happening. The demon was not merely fighting back, it was preparing to unleash its full power. The screams grew louder, more insistent, and the chamber was filled with a cacophony of tormented cries. The altar began to glow with a dark, malevolent energy, and Father Thomas could feel the demonic presence growing stronger. The very air seemed to crackle with an almost palpable sense of dread. It became clear that the demon was preparing for a final catastrophic attack, a last desperate attempt to assert its dominance. As the ritual faltered, Father Thomas and Peter saw a horrifying vision materialize before them. The chamber seemed to twist and warp, revealing a nightmarish scene of suffering and torment. The vision showed a series of grotesque and chilling images. People being tortured, their screams echoing through the darkness, their faces twisted in agony. Father Thomas's heart ached at the sight. The demon was using the ritual to feed on the fear and suffering of its victims, drawing strength from their pain. It was a horrifying realization, one that made the task at hand even more daunting. Peter, his face pale and his eyes wide with horror, turned to Father Thomas. "We need to do something. We can't let it continue." Father Thomas nodded, his face grim. "We need to focus. We must find a way to strengthen the ritual and break through the demon's defenses. It's our only chance." Determined to counteract the demon's dark influence, Father Thomas and Peter renewed their efforts. They chanted with renewed fervor, invoking the divine power of the Sanctus Crucis and reciting ancient prayers designed to strengthen the ritual and repel the demon. But the demon was not so easily deterred. As they worked, the chamber seemed to respond with increasing ferocity. The walls shook violently, and the temperature dropped sharply. The dark energy grew more intense, and the feeling of dread became almost overwhelming. Father Thomas's voice grew hoarse, but he pressed on, his determination unwavering. The ritual was their only hope, and they could not afford to falter now. The power of the Sanctus Crucis was immense, but it required their combined strength and unwavering faith to overcome the demon's dark magic. In the midst of the chaos, the chamber's oppressive energy seemed to reach a crescendo. The air was filled with a sense of impending doom, and the very fabric of the fortress seemed to tremble under the strain. It was clear that the final confrontation was imminent, and the outcome of the battle was uncertain. The demon's voice echoed through the chamber once again, a deep, resonant growl filled with malice and contempt. "You cannot win. You are merely delaying the inevitable. My power is eternal, and your efforts are meaningless." Father Thomas and Peter continued their efforts, their voices rising in a united plea for divine intervention. The struggle was fierce, but their determination was unwavering. They knew that the fate of the village and the lives of countless innocent people depended on their success. As the ritual reached its climax, the light of the Sanctus Crucis flared brightly, pushing back the darkness and forcing the demon to recoil. The chamber was bathed in a blinding radiance, and the demon's roars of fury filled the air. But even as the demon was momentarily repelled, it was clear that the battle was far from over. The demon's power was immense, and its influence was deeply entrenched. Father Thomas and Peter knew that they needed to be prepared for whatever came next, for the final confrontation with the demon was still ahead. As they left the chamber, their bodies and minds exhausted from the ordeal, Father Thomas and Peter knew that their fight was far from over. The demon was still a formidable threat, and the path to banishment was fraught with danger. But their resolve remained unshaken, and they were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The village of Eldridge awaited their return, and the people lived in a state of fear and uncertainty. Father Thomas and Peter knew that their work was not done, and that the final confrontation with the demon would require all of their strength and determination. With the Sanctus Crucis in hand and a renewed sense of purpose, they set out once more into the night, ready to face the darkness and protect the innocent from the malevolent force that threatened their world. Chapter 7. The Descent into Darkness. The oppressive silence of the forest seemed even more unsettling as Father Thomas and Peter Hayes made their way back through the dense undergrowth. Their encounter with the demon had left them physically and emotionally drained, but their resolve remained unshaken. The sight of suffering they had witnessed and the ominous power of the demon fueled their determination to see this through to the end. The sun had set, and the forest was enveloped in darkness, broken only by the occasional beam of moonlight that pierced through the canopy. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs seemed amplified in the stillness, a constant reminder of the lurking danger. Father Thomas's mind raced with thoughts of their next move. They needed to find a way to strengthen their ritual and gain access to the heart of the demon's lair. The demon's ability to draw strength from the suffering of its victims was a significant obstacle, and they needed a plan that could counteract its malevolent power. Peter walked beside him, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Father, what do we do now? How do we proceed?" Father Thomas took a deep breath, his gaze focused ahead. "We need to find the source of the demon's power and neutralize it. The relics in the chamber were only part of the puzzle. There must be something else, an artifact or a place of power that the demon is using to amplify its strength." As they emerged from the forest and approached the outskirts of the village, Father Thomas's thoughts turned to the villagers. The recent events had left them in a state of fear and uncertainty, and their plight weighed heavily on him. The villagers' suffering was a constant reminder of what was at stake. Upon reaching the village, they were met with anxious faces and worried whispers. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, and the fear of the unknown was palpable. Father Thomas and Peter made their way to the town hall, where they gathered the remaining villagers to update them on their progress. The town hall was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, casting long shadows on the walls. The villagers, a mix of men, women, and children, looked up with a mixture of hope and apprehension as Father Thomas and Peter entered the room. Father Thomas addressed the crowd, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "We have made progress in our fight against the demon, but the battle is far from over. We have learned that the demon draws its strength from a source of dark power, and we need to find and destroy this source to weaken it." The villagers exchanged nervous glances, their fear evident. A woman in the crowd, her eyes red from tears, spoke up. "Is there anything we can do to help? We're frightened and don't know what to do." Father Thomas offered a reassuring smile. "Your strength and support are crucial. We need to remain vigilant and continue with our preparations. If anyone has any information or observations that might help us, please come forward." As the villagers began to speak up, offering what little information they had, Father Thomas and Peter listened carefully. One elderly man recounted an old legend about a hidden cave deep in the forest, said to be a place of ancient dark power. The legend spoke of a portal to the underworld that could amplify dark magic. The information was vague, but it offered a potential lead. Father Thomas and Peter decided to investigate the cave, hoping it might hold the key to defeating the demon. As night fell, they gathered their supplies and prepared for the journey into the forest once again. The cave, according to the legend, was located in a remote and treacherous part of the forest, far from any well-trodden paths. It was said to be guarded by malevolent spirits and dangerous creatures. With lanterns and the Sanctus Crucis in hand, Father Thomas and Peter ventured back into the forest, their path illuminated by the flickering light of the lanterns. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures absent. The sense of foreboding was almost palpable, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. Hours of arduous trekking brought them to a narrow, almost hidden entrance to the cave. The entrance was partially obscured by overgrown vines and jagged rocks, and the air around it was thick with an oppressive energy. Father Thomas and Peter took a deep breath and entered the cave. Inside, the cave was cold and damp, the air heavy with the stench of decay. The walls were slick with moisture, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavernous space. The Sanctus Crucis provided a dim but reassuring light as they made their way deeper into the cave. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The cave was filled with an unsettling stillness, and the air grew colder with each step. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols and markings, their meanings lost to time, but resonating with a sense of dark power. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves in a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The chamber was filled with eerie, luminescent fungi that cast a ghostly glow over the surroundings. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, its surface covered in dark, twisted runes. Father Thomas and Peter approached the altar cautiously, their senses alert for any sign of danger. The altar seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the feeling of malevolence was almost suffocating. Father Thomas examined the altar closely, trying to decipher the runes and symbols. The markings were familiar, their dark energy unmistakable. It was clear that the altar was a focal point of the demon's power, and destroying it could potentially weaken the demon. Peter stood guard, his eyes scanning the chamber for any signs of movement. The air was thick with anticipation, and the tension was almost unbearable. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a low, resonant growl filled the chamber. The altar's runes glowed with an ominous light, and the temperature dropped sharply. The demon's presence was unmistakable, and it was clear that it was aware of their intrusion. Father Thomas and Peter braced themselves for the confrontation. The air crackled with dark energy, and the chamber seemed to close in around them. They knew that they had to act quickly to neutralize the demon's power and prevent it from launching a devastating attack. With the Sanctus Crucis held high, Father Thomas began to recite an ancient incantation, invoking the divine power to counteract the dark energy of the altar. The air was filled with a blinding light as the ritual commenced, and the chamber shook with the force of the struggle. The demon's growls grew louder, more insistent, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. The energy from the altar surged, and the chamber was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. It was clear that the demon was fighting back with all its might. Despite the intensity of the battle, Father Thomas and Peter pressed on, their resolve unwavering. The light of the Sanctus Crucis pushed back the darkness, and the ritual began to take effect. The altar's runes flickered and wavered, and the oppressive energy in the chamber started to recede. But just as it seemed that they were making progress, the chamber was filled with a blinding flash of light, and the demon's roar echoed through the cavern. The altar's power surged, and the chamber shook violently. Father Thomas and Peter were thrown to the ground, their bodies battered by the force of the explosion. The blinding light and the deafening roar left them disoriented, and it was a moment before they could regain their bearings. As the light faded, they saw that the chamber had been transformed. The altar was now surrounded by a swirling vortex of dark energy, and the air was filled with an ominous, oppressive force. The demon's presence was stronger than ever, and it was clear that they were facing their most formidable challenge yet. With renewed determination, Father Thomas and Peter rose to their feet and prepared for the final confrontation. The outcome of their battle with the demon was uncertain, but they knew that they had to fight with everything they had to protect the village and end the reign of terror. As they faced the swirling vortex of dark energy, Father Thomas and Peter knew that their fight was far from over. The demon was more powerful than ever, and the path to victory would be fraught with danger. But their resolve was unshaken, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8: The Unseen Terror. The swirling vortex of dark energy roared around them, a cacophony of tormented whispers and guttural growls filling the chamber. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes stood firm, their determination as resolute as ever despite the overwhelming power of the demon. The chamber was alive with a malevolent force, the walls pulsating with an eerie dark glow that seemed to distort reality itself. Father Thomas gripped the Sanctus Crucis tightly, its divine light flickering against the encroaching darkness. His eyes were locked on the center of the vortex, where he could sense the demon's presence growing stronger. The relic's power was their only hope, but it was clear that the demon was far from defeated. Peter, standing beside him with his flashlight, scanned the chamber for any sign of movement. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the sense of dread was almost palpable. Every instinct told him that they were on the brink of something far more sinister than they had faced before. As they braced themselves for the next wave of the demon's attack, the chamber's temperature dropped sharply, and the vortex's roar grew louder. The very ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and the walls of the cave began to crack and splinter under the strain of the demon's power. Father Thomas began to chant an ancient incantation, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The words were a powerful invocation, meant to strengthen the Sanctus Crucis and drive back the demon's dark energy. The light of the relic flared brightly, casting long, quivering shadows on the walls. But the demon was not easily deterred. The vortex of darkness surged, and the chamber was filled with a bone-chilling cold. The demon's voice echoed through the cavern, a deep and resonant growl filled with contempt and rage. "You think you can banish me with your pathetic rituals?" The demon's voice rumbled. "Your efforts are futile. I am beyond your comprehension." The darkness around them seemed to pulse with the demon's power, and the oppressive energy grew almost unbearable. Father Thomas and Peter felt as though they were being crushed by the weight of the demon's malevolence. Despite the overwhelming force, Father Thomas pressed on with the incantation, his voice unwavering. The light of the Sanctus Crucis flickered and danced, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The runes on the altar glowed brightly, their divine energy providing a glimmer of hope in the midst of the chaos. Peter's flashlight revealed the shifting shadows of the chamber, and he noticed a disturbing change. The shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, coalescing into grotesque shapes that writhed and twisted in the darkness. The figures were vaguely human, but their forms were distorted and malformed, their faces twisted in expressions of agony and torment. The sight was both horrifying and unsettling, and Peter felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. The demon's power was manifesting in these nightmarish apparitions, a reflection of its sadistic nature and its desire to instill fear. Father Thomas's chanting grew more intense, and the light of the Sanctus Crucis flared with renewed brilliance. The shadows recoiled from the light, but the vortex of darkness continued to swirl, its power undiminished. As the battle continued, the chamber seemed to shift and change, the very walls warping and twisting as if in response to the demon's will. The air was filled with an oppressive sense of dread, and the temperature dropped even further. Father Thomas and Peter felt as though they were fighting against an invisible force, their every effort met with a countering wave of dark energy. The demon's presence was overwhelming, and it was clear that their struggle was far from over. In the midst of the chaos, Father Thomas felt a surge of inspiration. The ancient texts he had studied spoke of a way to amplify the power of the Sanctus Crucis, using the energy of the relic to create a protective barrier against the demon's dark influence. He quickly relayed his plan to Peter, who nodded in understanding. Together, they focused their efforts on channeling the power of the Sanctus Crucis, directing its divine light to form a protective barrier around them. As they worked, the chamber's oppressive energy seemed to recede slightly, the vortex of darkness faltering in the face of the barrier. The air grew a bit warmer, and the nightmarish apparitions began to fade. But even as they gained some ground, the demon's anger only seemed to intensify. The growls and roars grew louder, and the darkness surged with renewed fury. It was clear that the demon would not be easily defeated, and the battle was far from over. Father Thomas and Peter continued their efforts, their voices rising in a unified plea for divine intervention. The protective barrier held firm against the demon's onslaught, but the strain was immense and their strength was waning. In a desperate move, Father Thomas called upon the full power of the Sanctus Crucis, invoking its ancient and sacred energy to its fullest extent. The light of the relic flared with a blinding brilliance, pushing back the darkness and forcing the vortex to recede. The chamber was filled with a dazzling radiance, and for a moment it seemed as though the demon might be vanquished. The oppressive energy was pushed back, and the air was filled with the sound of the demon's enraged howls. But the victory was short-lived. The demon's power surged once again, and the chamber was filled with a blinding flash of dark energy. The protective barrier began to falter, and the darkness closed in around them. Father Thomas and Peter struggled to maintain their position, their strength and resolve pushed to their limits. The demon's malevolence was overwhelming, and it was clear that they were facing a dire and uncertain battle. In the midst of the chaos, Father Thomas felt a sudden surge of inspiration. The ancient texts he had studied mentioned a way to harness the power of the Sanctus Crucis to create a powerful conduit of divine energy, capable of breaking through even the most formidable dark magic. He quickly relayed his plan to Peter, who nodded in understanding. Together, they focused their efforts on channeling the relic's energy into a concentrated beam of divine light, directing it towards the heart of the demon's power. As the beam of light struck the vortex of darkness, the chamber was filled with a deafening roar and a blinding flash of brilliance. The demon's howls of fury echoed through the cavern, and the darkness began to recede. Father Thomas and Peter held their ground, their bodies trembling with the strain of their efforts. The demon's power was immense, but their combined strength and the power of the Sanctus Crucis were beginning to make a difference. The vortex of darkness faltered, and the oppressive energy in the chamber began to wane. The nightmarish apparitions faded, and the temperature began to rise. The demon's roars grew fainter, and the chamber's oppressive atmosphere started to lift. But even as they gained ground, it was clear that the final confrontation was still ahead. The demon's power was far from depleted, and the battle was far from over. Father Thomas and Peter prepared for the final push, their resolve unshaken despite the overwhelming challenges. They knew that the fate of the village and the lives of countless innocent people depended on their success. With the Sanctus Crucis in hand and their determination as strong as ever, they faced the darkness head-on, ready to confront the demon and end its reign of terror once and for all. Chapter 9. The Heart of Darkness. The chamber's once overwhelming darkness had begun to recede, but a sense of foreboding still hung heavy in the air. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes stood at the edge of the demonic vortex, their strength pushed to its limits. The combined power of the Sanctus Crucis and their unwavering resolve had made significant progress, but the demon was far from defeated. Father Thomas's hands trembled as he held the Sanctus Crucis, its divine light flickering with a fierce intensity. Sweat trickled down his face, mixing with the grime of the battle. He and Peter had managed to create a temporary respite from the demon's relentless assault, but the true test lay ahead. The vortex of darkness, though weakened, still churned and roared with malevolent fury. The air was thick with a palpable tension, and the oppressive energy seemed to push against them, a constant reminder of the demon's lingering presence. The chamber was a landscape of chaos, with fractured walls and eerie shadows shifting unpredictably. Peter glanced at Father Thomas, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "We need to find the heart of its power. It's clear that the demon's strength is tied to something specific in this cave." Father Thomas nodded, his eyes scanning the chamber for any clues. "Yes, we need to locate the source of its power and destroy it. The altar is a focal point, but there might be something more, an artifact or a hidden chamber." Their search took them deeper into the cave, moving cautiously as the chamber's oppressive atmosphere continued to challenge their resolve. They navigated through twisting tunnels and narrow passages, the Sanctus Crucis casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. As they ventured further, the air grew colder, and the oppressive energy intensified. The darkness seemed to close in around them, and the occasional growl or hiss from the shadows reminded them of the demon's ever-present threat. Eventually, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its entrance obscured by a veil of darkness. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood a towering obsidian monolith, its surface covered in intricate runes and dark symbols. The monolith pulsed with a sinister, rhythmic energy, and Father Thomas could feel its dark power radiating through the chamber. "This must be it," Father Thomas said, his voice strained but resolute. "The heart of the demon's power. We need to destroy it to weaken the demon and end its reign of terror." Peter nodded, his flashlight illuminating the monolith's dark surface. The runes on the monolith seemed to shift and writhe, their dark energy a stark contrast to the divine light of the Sanctus Crucis. As they approached the monolith, the chamber was suddenly filled with a deafening roar. The demon's presence was overwhelming, its fury palpable as it sensed their approach. The ground shook violently, and the walls of the chamber began to crack and splinter. Father Thomas and Peter braced themselves for the demon's attack. The monolith's energy surged, and the chamber was filled with a blinding flash of dark light. The oppressive energy grew almost unbearable, and the demon's howls echoed through the cavern. Father Thomas began to recite a powerful incantation, invoking the full power of the Sanctus Crucis. The relic's light flared brightly, pushing back the encroaching darkness. Peter stood guard, his flashlight cutting through the swirling shadows and keeping an eye out for any signs of danger. The monolith's dark energy seemed to resist the divine light, the runes glowing with an eerie intensity. Father Thomas's chant grew more fervent, his voice rising in a desperate plea for divine intervention. The light of the Sanctus Crucis focused on the monolith, creating a beam of intense energy that struck the dark surface. The chamber shook violently, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. The monolith's energy surged, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to reach a critical point. Father Thomas and Peter struggled to maintain their position, their strength tested to its limits. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blinding flash of light, and the monolith's energy was thrown into chaos. The runes on the monolith writhed and twisted, their dark power faltering in the face of the divine light. Father Thomas and Peter seized the opportunity. They concentrated all their efforts on channeling the Sanctus Crucis's power into the monolith, directing a powerful beam of divine energy to shatter its dark core. The monolith roared and trembled, its surface cracking and splintering under the force of the attack. The oppressive energy in the chamber began to recede, and the blinding flash of light grew even more intense. The demon's howls of rage and agony filled the chamber, the sound echoing through the cavern as its power was driven back. The monolith's dark energy was overwhelmed, and the chamber was engulfed in a final blinding explosion of light. When the light finally faded, the chamber was eerily quiet. The oppressive energy had lifted, and the oppressive darkness had dissipated. The monolith lay shattered and broken, its dark power seemingly extinguished. Father Thomas and Peter stood amidst the debris, their bodies exhausted, but their spirits triumphant. The demon's presence had been driven back, and the source of its power had been destroyed. The chamber, once filled with malevolent energy, was now a place of quiet stillness. They took a moment to catch their breath, their minds racing with the enormity of what they had just accomplished. The battle had been fierce, but their determination and the power of the Sanctus Crucis had prevailed. Father Thomas looked at Peter, his expression a mix of relief and resolve. "We've done it. The demon's power has been broken, but we need to make sure that it can't return." Peter nodded, his eyes scanning the chamber. "We need to make sure that the remains of the monolith and any other dark artifacts are properly dealt with. We don't want any lingering traces of its power." With the immediate threat neutralized, they began the process of securing the chamber and ensuring that the remnants of the demon's power were properly contained. The cave, once a place of terror, was now a symbol of their victory. As they made their way back to the village, the weight of their battle began to lift. The village was safe, and the demon's reign of terror had been brought to an end. Father Thomas and Peter had faced unimaginable challenges and had emerged victorious, their resolve and bravery a testament to their unwavering commitment. The journey back was quiet, the oppressive energy of the cave replaced by the comforting sounds of the village. The villagers, who had anxiously awaited news, greeted them with a mixture of relief and gratitude. The nightmare that had plagued them was finally over, and the village could begin to rebuild and heal. Father Thomas and Peter were hailed as heroes, their bravery and sacrifice celebrated by the entire community. The village, once gripped by fear, now looked forward to a future free from the shadow of the demon's terror. The Sanctus Crucis, its divine light a beacon of hope, was returned to its place of honor in the village church. Father Thomas knew that their battle had not only been a fight against darkness, but also a journey of faith and courage. As the sun rose over the village, casting its warm light on the landscape, Father Thomas and Peter stood together, reflecting on the trials they had faced and the victory they had achieved. The battle had been fierce, but their unwavering resolve and the power of the Sanctus Crucis had guided them through the darkness. The village was safe once more, and the story of their struggle would be remembered as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of faith in the face of unimaginable evil. Chapter 10. The Dawn of Renewal. The first light of dawn filtered through the village's humble homes, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The village, which had once been gripped by terror, now basked in the calm and peace that followed the defeat of the demon. The nightmare that had plagued them was finally over, and a sense of renewal and hope filled the air. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes emerged from the church, their bodies weary, but their spirits lifted. The night had been long and arduous, but their victory over the demon had brought an end to the village's suffering. The villagers, who had gathered around the church to await news, greeted them with relieved smiles and heartfelt gratitude. The scene was a stark contrast to the fear and despair that had dominated the village just days before. Children played in the streets, their laughter a testament to the return of normalcy. The once crumbling buildings now stood strong, their repairs nearly complete, and the villagers worked together to restore their homes and lives. Father Thomas and Peter were warmly welcomed into the village square, where a small ceremony was being held in their honor. The village leader, an elderly man with a wise and kind demeanor, stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. Today, we celebrate not just the end of a dark chapter, but the beginning of a new era for our village, the leader's voice rang out. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes have shown extraordinary courage and determination. They have saved us from the clutches of evil and restored peace to our land. We owe them our deepest gratitude. The villagers cheered, their applause echoing through the square. Father Thomas and Peter, though tired, were touched by the outpouring of appreciation. The gratitude of the villagers was a balm to their exhausted souls, a reminder of why they had fought so hard. As the ceremony concluded, Father Thomas and Peter were presented with tokens of thanks from the village. A hand-carved wooden plaque for Father Thomas, and a beautifully woven tapestry for Peter. The gifts were symbols of the village's appreciation and the new bond forged between them. Despite the celebration, the reality of their recent battle weighed heavily on Father Thomas's mind. He knew that while the immediate threat had been vanquished, the demon's influence might have left lingering effects. It was important to ensure that any remnants of its power were completely eradicated. Peter, sensing Father Thomas's concern, approached him as the villagers continued their festivities. "What's on your mind?" he asked. Father Thomas looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "We need to be sure that the demon's influence is completely eradicated. There may be hidden traces of its power or dark artifacts that we haven't yet discovered. We should conduct a thorough investigation of the cave and the surrounding area." Peter nodded in agreement. "I'll help with the search. We should also make sure that the villagers are aware of the importance of keeping any suspicious activities or items under watch." With their plan in place, Father Thomas and Peter returned to the cave, determined to ensure that the demon's dark influence was truly gone. The cave, once a place of terror, was now quiet and still. The remnants of the shattered monolith lay scattered, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Their search revealed no further traces of the demon's power, but Father Thomas and Peter remained vigilant. They meticulously examined every corner of the cave, checking for any signs of lingering dark energy or hidden artifacts. Satisfied that the cave was secure, they turned their attention to the surrounding area. The villagers had been diligent in their efforts to repair and restore their homes, but Father Thomas wanted to ensure that there were no hidden dangers left behind. As they walked through the village, Father Thomas and Peter spoke with the villagers, offering advice on how to maintain vigilance and recognize any potential signs of dark influence. The villagers listened attentively, their gratitude evident in their expressions. Father Thomas and Peter's efforts paid off as the village began to return to a state of normalcy. The oppressive fear that had once gripped them was replaced by a renewed sense of hope and community. The village was not only rebuilding physically, but also emotionally, finding strength in their shared experiences and the bonds they had forged. As the days passed, the village's recovery continued. The church, which had been a symbol of hope throughout the battle, became a focal point for the community's healing process. Father Thomas and Peter worked tirelessly to support the villagers, offering counsel and comfort as they adjusted to their new reality. The village celebrated their newfound peace with a grand feast, a symbol of their unity and resilience. The feast was a joyful occasion, with music, laughter, and shared stories of the trials they had faced. It was a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the power of coming together in the face of adversity. Father Thomas and Peter were honored guests at the feast, their bravery and sacrifice celebrated by all. The villagers' warmth and appreciation were a testament to the positive impact they had made, and Father Thomas felt a profound sense of fulfillment. As the sun set over the village, casting a soft glow over the landscape, Father Thomas and Peter reflected on their journey. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but their courage and determination had brought about a positive change. Father Thomas knew that the victory over the demon was not just a personal triumph, but a victory for the entire village. The bonds forged during their struggle had created a sense of unity and resilience that would carry them through any future challenges. With the village now safe and the demon's influence eradicated, Father Thomas and Peter prepared to take their leave. Their mission was complete, and they had fulfilled their commitment to protecting the innocent and restoring peace. As they departed, they carried with them the knowledge that their efforts had made a lasting difference. The village's journey from darkness to renewal was a testament to their bravery and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The dawn of renewal had arrived, and the village looked forward to a future filled with hope and promise. Father Thomas and Peter left behind a legacy of courage and compassion, knowing that their work had brought light to a place once shrouded in darkness. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. As Father Thomas and Peter Hayes prepared to leave the village, they were greeted with a sense of accomplishment mixed with a lingering unease. Their efforts had freed the village from the demon's grasp, but the experience had left them both deeply reflective. The journey had been more than a battle against darkness. It had been a profound confrontation with their own fears and doubts. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The village was alive with activity, its residents embracing their newfound peace. However, Father Thomas and Peter could not shake the feeling that their work was not yet complete. The remnants of their battle still whispered through the shadows, and the weight of their experiences pressed heavily upon them. Before they left, Father Thomas felt compelled to revisit the cave one last time. There was something unsettling about the way the demon had been defeated, something that hinted at unresolved aspects of the dark power they had confronted. He sought to ensure that nothing was left to chance, that every shadow was banished. Peter accompanied him, sharing in the unease. "You're thinking there might be more to this, aren't you?" Father Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant entrance of the cave. "Yes, even though we've destroyed the source of the demon's power, I can't help but feel that there are echoes of the past still lingering. We need to be certain." The cave, once a place of terror, was now quiet and serene. The oppressive energy had dissipated, leaving behind a stark, almost eerie calm. As they entered, the air was noticeably cooler, and the shadows seemed to shift in subtle ways. Their search was methodical. Father Thomas and Peter combed through the cave's every nook and cranny, examining the shards of the shattered monolith and any other potential sources of dark energy. Despite their thorough efforts, they found no new evidence of lingering darkness. However, as they ventured deeper into the cave, they stumbled upon an ancient, hidden chamber that had previously gone unnoticed. The chamber was small, its walls adorned with faded, cryptic symbols. At its center stood an old, weathered chest covered in dust. Father Thomas approached the chest cautiously. "This might be what we've missed. It could hold something of significance." Peter nodded, and together they opened the chest. Inside, they found old manuscripts, relics, and an assortment of ancient artifacts. The manuscripts were written in an archaic language, their contents unknown to them but clearly steeped in dark history. Among the artifacts, they discovered a small, ornate box. It was intricately carved with symbols that matched those they had seen on the monolith. The box was sealed with a heavy, ancient lock. Father Thomas and Peter carefully opened the box, revealing a single ancient tome. The tome was bound in dark leather and bore an unsettling aura. Its cover was embossed with a symbol that matched the one on the monolith's core. "This book," Father Thomas said, his voice low and reverent, "might hold the key to understanding the full extent of what we've faced." They examined the tome with great care, its pages filled with complex symbols and disturbing illustrations. It appeared to be a grimoire, a book of dark magic and forbidden knowledge. The more they read, the more they realized the depth of the demon's influence. The tome described rituals, dark powers, and the history of the demon they had confronted. "This confirms it," Peter said, his face pale. "The demon's power was more deeply rooted than we thought. This grimoire could have played a significant role in its influence." Father Thomas nodded gravely. "We need to ensure this tome and any related artifacts are properly destroyed or sealed. They could pose a threat if left unchecked." They decided to take the tome and other artifacts back to the village for further study. The village leader and the scholars who had assisted them in the past would help them decipher the grimoire's contents and ensure that any remaining dark influence was contained. Upon their return, the village welcomed them with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The discovery of the hidden chamber and its contents stirred a sense of unease among the villagers. Father Thomas and Peter explained the situation and the importance of handling the artifacts with care. The village's scholars, led by the wise elder, examined the tome and the artifacts with a sense of urgency. Their findings revealed that the grimoire contained detailed instructions for summoning and controlling dark entities, further emphasizing the need for its complete destruction. Over the next few days, the scholars and priests worked diligently to neutralize the dark power within the tome. The relics were carefully handled and destroyed, their dark energy dissipating into the ether. Father Thomas and Peter remained in the village, assisting with the process and offering guidance. Their presence was a source of comfort and reassurance to the villagers, who appreciated their continued vigilance. As the final remnants of the dark power were dealt with, a sense of closure settled over the village. The shadows that had once threatened their peace were now truly gone, and the path to a brighter future was clear. Father Thomas and Peter, having fulfilled their commitment, prepared to leave the village once more. Their time there had been transformative, and they had forged deep connections with the people they had helped. The village, now free from the clutches of darkness, began to thrive once again. The rebuilding efforts continued, and the community's spirit was stronger than ever. The villagers looked to the future with hope, their once dark past now a distant memory. As Father Thomas and Peter departed, they carried with them a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced darkness head-on, confronted ancient evils, and emerged victorious. Their journey had been one of courage, faith, and resilience. The road ahead was clear, and their hearts were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that while their battle against the demon was over, their journey of service and faith continued. The echoes of the past had been confronted, and the future now held the promise of light and renewal. The sun set on the village, casting its warm glow over the landscape. Father Thomas and Peter walked away with a sense of peace, knowing that their efforts had made a lasting difference. The village, once a place of terror, had become a beacon of hope and renewal. Chapter 12. The Return of Darkness. The village, bathed in the golden glow of peace and tranquility, seemed to have put the horrors of the past behind it. The celebration of their newfound safety continued, with laughter and music filling the air. The sense of renewal was palpable, and the villagers were eager to embrace their future without the shadow of fear. However, beneath the surface of this apparent calm, a subtle shift began to occur. The peace was not as solid as it seemed. Whispers of discontent and unease began to surface among the villagers, carried on the wind like a chilling omen. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes, having completed their mission and ensured the destruction of the dark artifacts, had left the village, confident that their work was done. They resumed their travels, returning to their respective duties with a renewed sense of purpose. Yet, the weight of their experiences lingered, and they remained watchful for any signs of lingering darkness. Weeks passed, and the village's newfound peace was tested. Strange occurrences began to plague the villagers: unexplained shadows, unsettling noises in the night, and a growing sense of dread that seemed to seep into their daily lives. The villagers, initially hesitant to believe that their troubles were returning, soon found themselves unable to ignore the signs. One night, as the village lay under the cloak of darkness, a figure cloaked in shadow emerged from the depths of the forest. The figure moved with an eerie grace, its presence seemingly unnoticed by the villagers, who went about their nightly routines. It made its way towards the remnants of the old cave, now a place of relative safety and quiet. Inside the cave, the figure began to perform a ritual. The ancient symbols that had once adorned the monolith were meticulously recreated, and a dark, oppressive energy began to manifest. It was clear that the malevolent force had returned, stronger and more determined than before. In the village, the signs of trouble became increasingly apparent. Villagers reported disturbing dreams, encounters with shadowy figures, and a pervasive sense of unease. The once vibrant community now felt the grip of fear tightening around it. The shadows seemed to hold more substance, and the nights grew colder and darker. Father Thomas, sensing that something was amiss, decided to return to the village with Peter. They were greeted with a sense of urgency and concern from the villagers, who described the strange occurrences and their growing fears. Father Thomas and Peter immediately began investigating the source of the disturbance. They retraced their steps, visiting the cave and the surrounding areas. Their initial examination revealed that the old symbols had been redrawn, and the dark energy they had worked so hard to eradicate was once again making its presence known. As they delved deeper, they realized that the dark force was not only returning, but evolving. The malevolent entity that had once been confined had found a way to grow stronger. It had learned from its previous defeat, adapting and finding new ways to wield its power. Father Thomas and Peter sought the assistance of the village's scholars and priests once more. Together, they studied the dark symbols and the traces of malevolent energy, trying to understand the new threats and find a way to combat them. The scholars, with their expertise, uncovered that the dark force had been feeding off the fear and unrest among the villagers. It had become a self-sustaining entity, drawing strength from the very people it sought to torment. The more the villagers feared, the stronger the force became. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Father Thomas and Peter devised a plan to confront the entity and neutralize its power once and for all. They would need to combine their efforts with the villagers, strengthening their resolve and unity to overcome the darkness. The village was once again plunged into a state of vigilance. Father Thomas and Peter led the villagers in rituals of protection and purification, working tirelessly to bolster their defenses and dispel the growing malevolence. The community came together, their collective will and strength becoming a powerful force against the encroaching darkness. The confrontation with the dark entity was imminent. Father Thomas, Peter, and the villagers prepared for a final showdown. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, but the determination to reclaim their peace drove them forward. On the night of the confrontation, the village was bathed in an eerie glow. Father Thomas and Peter led the villagers to the cave, where the dark ritual was being conducted. The figure cloaked in shadow was in the midst of summoning dark energies, its malevolent presence palpable. Father Thomas and Peter approached the figure, their resolve unshaken. They began to recite ancient prayers and perform counter-rituals, their voices rising above the oppressive darkness. The clash between the forces of light and darkness was intense, the energy crackling and surging with each incantation. The battle was arduous, with the dark entity resisting every attempt to banish it. The entity's power seemed to grow with each moment, its form shifting and writhing as it fought against the efforts to expel it. The villagers, though frightened, stood firm, their collective strength providing a crucial support. Father Thomas and Peter pressed on, their voices unwavering as they chanted the ancient prayers. The rituals they performed were designed to weaken the dark force and sever its connection to the source of its power. It was a test of endurance and faith, with the outcome uncertain. As the night wore on, the struggle reached its climax. Father Thomas and Peter, drawing on their deepest reserves of strength and resolve, managed to breach the core of the dark energy. The entity, though formidable, began to falter under the combined assault of their efforts. With a final, desperate effort, Father Thomas and Peter completed the ritual. A blinding light erupted from the cave, casting away the shadows and dispelling the dark energy. The entity, now weakened and vulnerable, was finally banished, its presence dissipating into the void. The village, though exhausted, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The dark force had been vanquished once more, and the sense of dread that had gripped them began to lift. Father Thomas and Peter, their faces etched with fatigue, but also with relief, looked upon the villagers with a renewed sense of hope. The confrontation had been a testament to their strength and unity. The village, having faced the darkness once more, had emerged victorious. The struggle had been long and arduous, but the bonds forged during the battle had strengthened the community and prepared them for whatever challenges lay ahead. As dawn broke over the village, the light of a new day symbolized the end of the dark chapter. Father Thomas and Peter, having fulfilled their mission, prepared to continue their journey. Their work in the village had been crucial, and their efforts had made a lasting impact. The village, now free from the shadow of darkness, began to rebuild and recover. The sense of peace and unity was stronger than ever, and the community looked forward to a future unburdened by fear. Father Thomas and Peter, having played their part, left the village with a sense of fulfillment and pride. The echoes of the past had been confronted and overcome. The village's journey from darkness to light was a testament to their resilience and strength. Father Thomas and Peter knew that their journey was far from over, but they carried with them the knowledge that they had made a difference. The road ahead was filled with promise, and the lessons learned from their battle against the darkness would guide them in their future endeavors. The village, now a beacon of hope, stood as a reminder of the power of unity and the triumph of light over darkness. Chapter 13. The Haunting Echoes. As the sun rose over the village, it seemed to usher in a new era of tranquility. The villagers, relieved from the immediate threat, began to rebuild and renew their lives. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes, having played their part in vanquishing the dark force, continued their journey, knowing that their efforts had made a lasting difference. However, even as the village embraced its newfound peace, a troubling undercurrent began to stir. The darkness that had been expelled had left behind not only fear, but also lingering echoes, residual energies that whispered of past horrors and unresolved tensions. The village's recovery was marred by unsettling occurrences that defied explanation. Father Thomas and Peter returned to their respective duties, but their minds often wandered back to the village. Despite the apparent victory, a sense of unease persisted. They couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness had left behind more than just fear. It had left a haunting echo that could not be easily silenced. One evening, as Father Thomas prepared for his nightly prayers, he received an urgent message from the village leader. The message spoke of strange phenomena that had begun occurring in the village once more: phantom noises, eerie shadows, and unexplained disturbances. The leader implored Father Thomas to return and address these new issues. Father Thomas, concerned but determined, contacted Peter and made arrangements to return to the village. They arrived to find that while the community was visibly working hard to restore normalcy, the eerie disturbances were unmistakable. The villagers were increasingly on edge, their fear exacerbated by the recent unsettling experiences. Father Thomas and Peter met with the village leader and discussed the recent phenomena. The leader described a series of events: doors slamming shut on their own, whispers in the dark, and objects moving without explanation. The disturbances seemed to be centered around specific areas of the village, including the old cave and the site where the dark rituals had been performed. As they investigated the cave and the surrounding areas, Father Thomas and Peter noticed subtle but troubling signs. The once purified cave now bore traces of residual dark energy, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. It seemed that the malevolent force had left behind a mark, an echo of its presence that continued to haunt the village. The scholars and priests in the village conducted their own investigations, seeking to understand the nature of the disturbances. They discovered that the echoes of the past were not merely residual energy, but manifestations of the fear and trauma experienced by the villagers. The dark entity had fed off these emotions, and its departure had left a scar on the community's collective psyche. Realizing that the problem was not just about physical remnants, but also psychological and emotional trauma, Father Thomas and Peter decided to address the issue on multiple fronts. They organized community gatherings to discuss the disturbances and provide support to those affected. They also initiated rituals to cleanse the lingering energies and perform healing practices. The process was slow and challenging. The echoes of fear and anxiety were deeply embedded in the villagers' minds, and it took time to help them overcome their trauma. Father Thomas and Peter worked tirelessly, offering counseling, spiritual guidance, and reassurance. One night, as Father Thomas and Peter conducted a cleansing ritual in the village square, a particularly intense disturbance occurred. The ground shook, and a powerful gust of wind swept through the area. The villagers gathered in fear, their anxiety palpable. Father Thomas, resolute in his efforts, continued the ritual, his voice steady and strong. The energy in the air seemed to shift, and the oppressive presence began to wane. As the ritual reached its climax, a blinding light erupted, dispelling the darkness and bringing a sense of calm to the village. The disturbance subsided, and the villagers, though shaken, began to feel a sense of relief. The ritual had successfully dispelled the lingering echoes of darkness, and the village's atmosphere lightened. The process of healing was far from complete, but the immediate threat had been addressed. Father Thomas and Peter remained in the village for several more weeks, continuing their efforts to support the community. They worked closely with the villagers, helping them to rebuild their sense of security and peace. The process was gradual, but the progress was evident. The village began to recover, and the disturbances became less frequent. The echoes of the past were slowly being laid to rest, and the community's spirit began to heal. Father Thomas and Peter were heartened by the resilience and determination of the villagers. As they prepared to leave once more, Father Thomas and Peter felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their work had been challenging, but they had faced the darkness with courage and compassion. The village, though scarred by its experiences, had shown remarkable strength and unity. Before departing, Father Thomas and Peter offered their final prayers and blessings for the village. They expressed their gratitude for the opportunity to help and reassured the villagers that their efforts had made a significant difference. The village watched as Father Thomas and Peter left, their presence a source of hope and strength. The journey had been arduous, but the lessons learned and the bonds forged had strengthened the community. As Father Thomas and Peter continued their travels, they carried with them the knowledge that their work had made a lasting impact. The echoes of the past had been confronted, and the path to healing had been paved. The village, now a beacon of resilience and renewal, stood as a testament to the triumph of light over darkness. The road ahead was filled with promise, and the lessons from their experiences would guide them in their future endeavors. The village, though forever changed, had emerged stronger and more united. The haunting echoes of the past were being silenced, and a new chapter of hope and renewal was beginning. Chapter 14: The Forbidden Knowledge. As Father Thomas and Peter Hayes continued their travels, they couldn't shake the feeling that their recent encounters with the dark forces were not merely isolated incidents. The residual dark energy they had encountered in the village and the echoes of the past hinted at something more sinister and far-reaching. Their journey took them to ancient libraries and forgotten archives in search of answers that might explain the darkness they had faced. Their quest for knowledge led them to a remote monastery, renowned for its vast collection of arcane texts and manuscripts. The monastery, nestled high in the mountains, was shrouded in an air of mystery and secrecy. Its monks were known for their dedication to preserving ancient wisdom and protecting sacred knowledge. Father Thomas and Peter arrived at the monastery, where they were greeted by Brother Elias, a venerable monk with a deep understanding of the occult and ancient rituals. They explained their experiences and the persistent disturbances they had encountered, hoping that the monastery's resources could shed light on their situation. Brother Elias listened intently, his eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and curiosity. He agreed to assist them and led them to the monastery's library, an impressive repository of ancient texts and forbidden knowledge. The library was a labyrinth of towering shelves filled with dusty tomes and scrolls that seemed to pulse with latent energy. As Father Thomas and Peter delved into the texts, they uncovered references to a forbidden knowledge, a dark lore that spoke of ancient rituals, powerful entities, and the manipulation of primordial forces. The texts described a network of dark energies that interconnected across the world, feeding on fear and turmoil. Among the texts, they found an ancient manuscript written in a cryptic language. The manuscript detailed the history of a powerful dark entity that had existed long before recorded history. This entity, referred to as the Devourer, had the ability to consume human souls and grow stronger with each act of violence and terror. The manuscript revealed that the Devourer had been bound and sealed away by a coalition of ancient mystics and priests. However, it also indicated that the entity's influence could still be felt through echoes of fear and unresolved darkness. The manuscript contained a series of arcane symbols and rituals designed to locate and confront such entities. Father Thomas and Peter realized that the disturbances they had faced were not merely random occurrences, but part of a larger, more intricate pattern. The Devourer's influence had reached beyond the village, manifesting in the residual energies and the haunting echoes that persisted. Determined to uncover more, they continued their research, cross-referencing the manuscript with other texts. They discovered that the Devourer had a network of followers who sought to resurrect it by channeling dark energies and feeding on human suffering. These followers, hidden in the shadows of history, were working to release the Devourer from its prison. The research revealed that the dark forces they had encountered were merely pawns in a larger game. The true threat was the potential return of the Devourer, an entity of immense power that could plunge the world into an age of darkness and despair. Father Thomas and Peter decided to take immediate action. They needed to locate and confront the followers who were attempting to resurrect the Devourer and prevent them from completing their dark rituals. The knowledge they had gained pointed to a series of locations where these rituals were being conducted, places of ancient power and dark significance. Their first destination was an abandoned temple, hidden deep within a remote forest. According to the texts, this temple was a focal point for the dark energies and a site where the followers performed their rituals. Father Thomas and Peter, armed with their newfound knowledge, set out to investigate. The journey to the temple was fraught with danger. The forest surrounding the temple was dense and treacherous, and the air was thick with an oppressive sense of foreboding. The further they ventured, the more intense the feeling of darkness became. It was as if the very forest was a living embodiment of the devourer's malevolent influence. As they approached the temple, they encountered signs of recent activity, strange symbols carved into trees, remnants of ritualistic sacrifices, and an eerie silence that seemed to permeate the area. The temple itself was a crumbling structure, overgrown with vines and shrouded in shadows. Father Thomas and Peter carefully explored the temple, their senses alert for any signs of danger. The interior was filled with arcane symbols and dark artifacts, indicating that the followers had been conducting their rituals here. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, and the darkness seemed to have a physical presence. In the heart of the temple, they discovered an altar where recent rituals had been performed. The altar was adorned with dark symbols and occult objects, and the air around it crackled with residual energy. Father Thomas and Peter performed a series of purification rituals, attempting to cleanse the area of the dark influence. As they worked, they felt a sudden, intense surge of energy. The temple seemed to come alive with a malevolent force, and they realized that their presence had triggered a reaction from the dark entities. Shadows coalesced into twisted forms, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Father Thomas and Peter fought back against the encroaching darkness, their resolve unwavering. They recited ancient prayers and performed counter-rituals, their efforts aimed at dispelling the dark energy and neutralizing the threat. The battle was intense, with the dark entities resisting their attempts to banish them. Despite the formidable opposition, Father Thomas and Peter managed to push back the darkness. The rituals they performed began to take effect, and the oppressive presence in the temple began to recede. The shadows dissipated, and the air lightened as the dark energies were driven away. Exhausted but triumphant, Father Thomas and Peter completed their purification of the temple. The sense of darkness lifted, and the oppressive atmosphere was replaced with a sense of relief. The immediate threat had been addressed, but they knew that their mission was far from over. Their next step was to continue their investigation, following the trail of the followers who sought to resurrect the devourer. The ancient texts had provided valuable insights, but the journey ahead promised to be even more challenging. As they left the temple, Father Thomas and Peter were more determined than ever to prevent the return of the devourer. The knowledge they had gained and the experiences they had encountered only fueled their resolve to confront the darkness and protect the world from its malevolent influence. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty and danger, but Father Thomas and Peter were prepared to face whatever challenges lay before them. The echoes of the past had revealed a new, more ominous threat, and they were committed to ensuring that the darkness would not prevail. Chapter 15: The Unseen Enemy. The journey to thwart the devourer's resurrection led Father Thomas and Peter Hayes to the heart of an ancient city buried deep beneath the earth. The texts from the monastery had revealed that the city was a significant site for the dark followers who sought to unleash the devourer's full power. The city, long forgotten by most of the world, was rumored to be a nexus of ancient evil and dark rituals. Navigating through the labyrinthine tunnels leading to the city proved challenging. The passages were narrow and winding, with ancient symbols etched into the walls. The air was thick with a musty odor, and the oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the distant drip of water or the echo of their footsteps. As they approached the city, the atmosphere grew colder, and an unsettling energy permeated the air. The city's entrance was concealed behind a massive, rusted gate adorned with dark symbols. Father Thomas and Peter, equipped with ancient texts and protective talismans, pushed the gate open with great effort, revealing a subterranean metropolis frozen in time. The city was vast, with towering structures and intricate carvings that spoke of a bygone era of dark worship. The streets were lined with decaying buildings and eerie statues, their features twisted into grotesque expressions. The ground was littered with remnants of past rituals, sacrificial tools, shattered artifacts, and darkly stained remnants. Father Thomas and Peter moved cautiously through the city, their senses heightened. They were aware that they were not alone. The dark followers, driven by their twisted ambitions, had likely established a stronghold within the city. The texts indicated that the city's central temple was the focal point for their rituals and a potential site for the resurrection of the devourer. Their path led them to the central temple, an imposing structure of black stone and dark energy. The temple was surrounded by a protective barrier, a shimmering force field that pulsed with malevolent energy. Father Thomas and Peter realized that they would need to breach this barrier to access the inner sanctum. They approached the barrier with caution, using the ancient texts to decipher the symbols and perform a series of counter-rituals. The barrier resisted their efforts, its energy crackling and distorting as they worked. The process was slow and exhausting, but their determination and knowledge guided them. As they completed the counter-rituals, the barrier began to waver and eventually dissipated, revealing the entrance to the inner temple. The atmosphere inside was charged with dark energy, and the temperature dropped significantly. Shadows seemed to move independently, and the air was filled with an oppressive silence. Inside the inner temple, they discovered a grand chamber adorned with dark symbols and sacrificial altars. The room was dominated by a massive, intricately carved throne, which seemed to pulse with an otherworldly power. The presence of the devourer was palpable, and the chamber felt alive with malevolent intent. At the center of the chamber stood a dark altar, where the followers had performed their rituals. The altar was adorned with fresh blood and dark offerings, evidence of the recent attempts to summon the devourer. Father Thomas and Peter knew that they had to act quickly to prevent the completion of the resurrection. As they prepared to disrupt the rituals, they were ambushed by a group of dark followers, cloaked figures wielding dark magic and malevolent intent. The followers, having sensed the intrusion, were ready to defend their dark rights at any cost. A fierce battle ensued, with Father Thomas and Peter fighting against the dark forces. The followers wielded powerful dark magic, summoning shadows and launching attacks that tested their resolve. Despite the intense opposition, Father Thomas and Peter's determination and skill allowed them to hold their ground. Amid the chaos, Father Thomas managed to locate and activate an ancient artifact, a relic mentioned in the texts, that could neutralize the dark energies. The artifact emitted a blinding light, pushing back the shadows and disrupting the followers' dark magic. The chamber filled with a brilliant glow, and the oppressive darkness began to recede. The dark followers, weakened and disoriented, retreated into the shadows, leaving Father Thomas and Peter victorious but exhausted. They quickly moved to the dark altar, performing a series of purification rituals to cleanse the area of the lingering dark energies. As they completed the rituals, the chamber began to calm, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The dark altar was purified, and the remnants of the dark rituals were eradicated. Father Thomas and Peter knew that their efforts had thwarted the immediate threat, but they also understood that the danger was not entirely over. The dark followers had been a formidable enemy, and their attempts to resurrect the devourer were a testament to their relentless pursuit of power. Father Thomas and Peter were acutely aware that the followers' actions were part of a larger, more complex scheme. The network of dark forces and their influence extended beyond the subterranean city. With the central temple cleansed and the immediate threat addressed, Father Thomas and Peter prepared to leave the ancient city. They knew that their journey was far from over, and that they would need to continue their efforts to confront and defeat the dark forces that sought to bring about the devourer's return. Their next steps involved further investigation and exploration of the dark network. The texts had revealed clues about additional locations and hidden strongholds where the followers might be operating. Father Thomas and Peter were resolved to follow these leads and confront the darkness wherever it might appear. As they left the ancient city, the weight of their mission was clear. The battle against the devourer and its followers was a relentless struggle, but their commitment to protecting the world from dark forces remained unwavering. The knowledge they had gained and the victories they had achieved would guide them in their continued quest to safeguard humanity. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers. However, Father Thomas and Peter were prepared to face whatever came their way. The fight against the unseen enemy was far from over, and their determination to prevent the devourer's return would drive them forward. Chapter 16. The Shadow's Embrace. The path from the ancient city led Father Thomas and Peter Hayes to a desolate region known for its eerie tranquility and unsettling atmosphere. The landscape was barren, with twisted trees and cracked earth that seemed to echo the remnants of dark energy. The text had indicated that this region was home to a hidden stronghold of the Dark Followers, a place where they conducted their most secretive rituals. As they journeyed through the desolate land, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind or distant cries. The landscape itself seemed to shift and change, as if the very ground was alive with malevolent intent. Their destination was an ancient fortress, concealed within a labyrinthine canyon. The fortress, hidden from view by the natural terrain, was said to be a key site for the Dark Followers' operations. According to the texts, it was here that they gathered to plan their rituals and strategize their efforts to resurrect the devourer. The approach to the fortress was treacherous. The canyon was narrow and winding, with steep cliffs and narrow pathways that offered little protection. Father Thomas and Peter moved carefully, aware that the Dark Followers would likely have set traps and defenses to guard their stronghold. As they neared the fortress, they saw its imposing silhouette against the darkening sky. The structure was ancient and foreboding, with towering walls and dark spires that seemed to pierce the heavens. The fortress was surrounded by a moat of stagnant water and protected by a series of crude barricades and traps. Father Thomas and Peter devised a plan to infiltrate the fortress. They used their knowledge of ancient rituals and protective talismans to bypass the traps and barriers. Their approach was cautious but determined, as they knew the Dark Followers would be on high alert. Once inside the fortress, they found themselves in a grand hall adorned with dark symbols and arcane artifacts. The air was heavy with a palpable sense of dread, and the walls seemed to pulse with dark energy. The hall was lined with shadowy figures, Dark Followers who had gathered for a secret meeting. The followers, clad in dark robes and armed with sinister-looking weapons, were engaged in a ritualistic ceremony. The chamber was filled with a low hum of incantations and the flickering glow of dark flames. Father Thomas and Peter observed from the shadows, trying to discern the nature of the ritual and its implications. The ceremony was focused on a large, dark crystal placed on an ornate altar. The crystal emitted a faint, eerie light and seemed to be the focal point of the ritual. The followers chanted in a language that resonated with dark power, their voices rising in intensity. Father Thomas and Peter recognized the significance of the crystal. It was a conduit for channeling dark energies and amplifying the followers' rituals. The ritual was designed to strengthen the dark network and increase the influence of the devourer. The crystal was a critical component in their plans to resurrect the ancient entity. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Father Thomas and Peter prepared to disrupt the ceremony. They knew that directly confronting the followers would be dangerous, so they decided to sabotage the ritual by targeting the crystal. Their plan was to use a combination of purification rituals and destructive magic to neutralize the crystal's power. They approached the altar with stealth, avoiding detection by the Dark Followers. The ritual was reaching its climax, and the energy in the chamber was reaching a fever pitch. Father Thomas and Peter began their counter-rituals, invoking ancient prayers and using sacred relics to disrupt the dark energies. As they performed the rituals, the dark crystal began to react. Its light flickered and dimmed, and the energy within the chamber became unstable. The Dark Followers, sensing the disturbance, turned their attention to Father Thomas and Peter, their anger and desperation palpable. A fierce confrontation ensued. The Dark Followers attacked with powerful dark magic, summoning shadows and launching attacks to protect their ritual. Father Thomas and Peter fought back valiantly, using their knowledge and skills to counter the dark magic and defend themselves. The battle was intense, with the Dark Followers exhibiting a level of desperation and fury. The chamber was filled with chaotic energy, and the conflict pushed Father Thomas and Peter to their limits. despite the overwhelming odds, they remained focused on their goal, neutralizing the dark crystal and disrupting the ritual. As the battle reached its climax, Father Thomas managed to complete the final phase of the counter ritual. The crystal shattered with a resounding explosion, its dark energy dissipating in a burst of light. The chamber was engulfed in a blinding flash, and the dark followers were thrown into disarray. The destruction of the crystal had a profound impact on the ritual and the dark followers. The chamber's oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the dark energies that had pervaded the fortress began to recede. The dark followers, weakened and disoriented, fled into the shadows, their plans thwarted. Father Thomas and Peter, though exhausted and battered, had succeeded in their mission. The dark crystal was destroyed, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. The fortress, once a bastion of dark power, was now a symbol of the victory over the shadows. As they left the fortress, Father Thomas and Peter reflected on the significance of their actions. The destruction of the crystal had dealt a severe blow to the dark followers and their plans to resurrect the devourer. However, they were aware that the dark forces were not completely defeated. The network of darkness remained, and their fight was far from over. Their journey continued, with new challenges and dangers awaiting them. The dark followers were persistent, and their efforts to bring about the devourer's return would not easily be extinguished. Father Thomas and Peter were prepared to confront whatever threats lay ahead and to continue their quest to protect the world from the encroaching darkness. The path forward was uncertain, but their resolve was unwavering. They had faced the shadows and emerged victorious, and their determination to safeguard humanity from the dark forces would guide them in their continued fight against the devourer and its followers. Chapter 17. The Final Ritual. The fortress lay in ruins, but the victory was bittersweet for Father Thomas and Peter Hayes. Despite their success in destroying the dark crystal and disrupting the dark followers' ceremony, they were acutely aware that the threat was far from over. The texts they had studied hinted at a final, cataclysmic ritual, the culmination of the dark followers' efforts to resurrect the devourer. They had to locate and stop this ritual to ensure the devourer's return could be prevented. Their search led them to a remote, ancient monastery, deep in a secluded forest. The monastery was a relic from a forgotten age, its architecture both majestic and foreboding. The texts had indicated that this was the site of the final ritual, where the dark followers intended to summon the devourer in full force. The monastery was surrounded by dense woods and a series of protective wards designed to keep intruders at bay. As they approached the monastery, Father Thomas and Peter could sense the intensifying dark energy. The air was heavy with malevolence, and the trees seemed to whisper warnings in the wind. They knew that the monastery was heavily guarded, and their entry would not go unnoticed. They used the knowledge and skills they had gained throughout their journey to navigate the wards and defenses surrounding the monastery. The approach was perilous, with numerous traps and dark enchantments designed to deter or eliminate intruders. Each step forward was fraught with danger, but their determination to stop the final ritual drove them forward. Once inside the monastery, they found themselves in a grand hall filled with ancient relics and dark symbols. The atmosphere was thick with dark energy, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist in response to their presence. The hall was adorned with a massive, darkened altar at its center, its surface covered in intricate runes and dark offerings. The dark followers were gathered around the altar, their chanting filling the hall with a low, menacing hum. They were preparing for the final phase of their ritual, with the intent to complete the summoning of the devourer. The ceremony was designed to harness the full power of the dark crystal and open a portal for the devourer to enter the world. Father Thomas and Peter moved with stealth, observing the dark followers from the shadows. They understood that a direct confrontation would be disastrous. The ritual needed to be disrupted without causing a full-scale battle that could potentially lead to the completion of the summoning. Their plan was to dismantle the ritual's components and neutralize the dark crystal before it could complete the summoning. They began by targeting the artifacts and symbols around the altar, using their knowledge of ancient rituals to counteract the dark energies. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the dark followers were scattered and defeated. The chamber's oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the dark energies dissipated. The dark crystal, now shattered and powerless, lay in ruins among the debris. Father Thomas and Peter, though exhausted and battered, had succeeded in preventing the final ritual and averting the resurrection of the devourer. The monastery, once a bastion of dark power, was now a symbol of their hard-fought victory. As they prepared to leave the monastery, they reflected on the significance of their actions. The battle against the devourer and its followers had been long and arduous, but their determination and courage had seen them through. The world was safe for now, but they knew that the dark forces would not easily be vanquished. Their journey had revealed the depth of the darkness and the lengths to which the followers would go to achieve their goals. The struggle had tested their resolve and strength, but it had also forged a deep bond between them. With the immediate threat addressed, Father Thomas and Peter looked ahead to their next steps. The fight against the dark forces was ongoing, and they were prepared to continue their quest to protect humanity from the shadows that sought to engulf it. As they left the monastery, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The path forward was uncertain, but their commitment to safeguarding the world from the encroaching darkness remained unwavering. Their journey was far from over, and the challenges ahead would require continued vigilance and bravery. Father Thomas and Peter were ready to face whatever came their way, guided by their resolve and the knowledge that their fight was a noble and necessary endeavor. Chapter 18. Echoes of the Past. The defeat of the Dark Followers and the thwarting of their final ritual had brought a sense of temporary relief, but the battle against the encroaching darkness was far from over. Father Thomas and Peter Hayes knew that their journey was not yet complete. The dark forces that had sought to resurrect the devourer were part of a larger, more insidious threat that extended beyond individual battles. Their next lead took them to an ancient crypt hidden deep within a remote mountain range. The crypt was rumored to hold secrets of the past, dark knowledge and forgotten lore that might reveal the origins and weaknesses of the devourer. The texts they had studied suggested that understanding the history of the devourer could provide crucial insights into how to finally vanquish the entity once and for all. The approach to the crypt was arduous. The terrain was treacherous, with steep cliffs and rugged pathways that tested their endurance. The air was thin and cold, and the howling winds added to the sense of desolation. As they climbed higher, the atmosphere grew more oppressive, and the sense of ancient malevolence became palpable. Upon reaching the crypt, they were faced with an imposing entrance carved into the mountain's face. The entrance was adorned with ancient symbols and inscriptions, hinting at the crypt's dark history. Father Thomas and Peter prepared themselves for what lay ahead, knowing that the crypt's secrets were likely to be guarded by powerful enchantments and traps. They carefully made their way through the entrance, finding themselves in a vast chamber filled with ancient relics and dusty tomes. The crypt was a repository of dark knowledge, its walls lined with shelves of ancient scrolls and arcane artifacts. The air was thick with the weight of centuries-old darkness, and the oppressive silence was occasionally broken by the distant drip of water. As they explored the crypt, they discovered a series of chambers and passages, each containing fragments of forgotten lore and dark rituals. The texts they found spoke of the devourer's origins, its rise to power, its connection to the dark forces, and the rituals used to summon and control it. Father Thomas and Peter uncovered details about the nature of the devourer, revealing that it was a being of immense power, capable of consuming souls and manipulating dark energies. The texts described how the devourer had been banished to the abyss long ago by a coalition of powerful beings, including ancient sorcerers and celestial forces. One of the key revelations was the existence of a powerful artifact, a relic known as the Heart of the Abyss, that was crucial to the devourer's containment. The heart of the abyss was said to be a key element in binding the devourer and preventing its return. The artifact was hidden away in a secure location, its exact whereabouts unknown to all but a few. The discovery of this artifact was a significant breakthrough. Father Thomas and Peter realized that locating and securing the heart of the abyss would be essential in their efforts to finally defeat the devourer. They began to piece together clues from the texts, using their knowledge to trace the artifact's possible location. As they delved deeper into the crypt, they encountered a series of elaborate traps and dark enchantments designed to protect the secrets from intruders. The traps were sophisticated and deadly, testing their resolve and ingenuity. Father Thomas and Peter navigated the dangers with caution, using their skills and knowledge to bypass each obstacle. In one of the final chambers, they discovered an ancient tome, its cover adorned with dark symbols and worn with age. The tome contained detailed instructions for locating the heart of the abyss and described the final ritual required to access the artifact. The ritual involved a complex series of incantations and symbolic actions, performed at a specific celestial alignment. The tome also revealed the existence of a hidden sanctuary, a place where the heart of the abyss was believed to be concealed. The sanctuary was located in a remote and perilous region, accessible only during a rare celestial event. Father Thomas and Peter knew that they needed to act quickly to reach the sanctuary before the alignment passed. With the newfound knowledge, they prepared to leave the crypt and embark on their journey to locate the heart of the abyss. The crypt's oppressive atmosphere seemed to shift as they departed, the ancient malevolence retreating in response to their discovery of the hidden truths. As they made their way back to civilization, Father Thomas and Peter reflected on the significance of their findings. The crypt had provided crucial insights into the history of the devourer and the means to finally vanquish it. The heart of the abyss was now their primary objective, and they were resolved to secure it and complete their mission. Their journey to the hidden sanctuary would be fraught with challenges and dangers, but they were prepared to face whatever came their way. The echoes of the past had guided them to this pivotal moment, and their determination to protect the world from the encroaching darkness remained unwavering. The path forward was uncertain, but their resolve was steadfast. They had uncovered the secrets of the devourer's origins and the key to its final defeat. The battle against the darkness was reaching its climax, and Father Thomas and Peter were ready to confront the ultimate challenge and secure the heart of the abyss. Chapter 19: The Sanctuary's Secret. With the revelation of the heart of the abyss as their crucial objective, Father Thomas and Peter Hayes set out towards the remote sanctuary mentioned in the ancient tome. Their journey was driven by urgency, for the celestial alignment necessary for accessing the artifact was drawing near. The sanctuary was said to be located in an isolated and perilous region known only to a few, a place where the veil between the physical and the supernatural was thin. Their path led them to a dense and treacherous forest, shrouded in an eerie mist that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches forming an intricate maze that obscured the way forward. Every step deeper into the forest seemed to heighten the sense of foreboding, and the air grew heavier with an ominous presence. The forest was alive with strange sounds, whispers, distant cries, and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the forest itself was aware of their intrusion and was trying to deter them from reaching their goal. Despite the overwhelming sense of dread, Father Thomas and Peter pressed on, guided by the cryptic clues from the tome. After days of navigating the dense forest, they finally arrived at the edge of a vast chasm. The chasm was a gaping maw in the earth, its depths shrouded in darkness and mist. At the bottom of the chasm lay an ancient and enigmatic structure, an enormous stone edifice that appeared to be a gateway or entrance to another realm. The structure was adorned with arcane symbols and ancient runes, and it seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. The tome had indicated that this was the entrance to the hidden sanctuary, accessible only during the rare celestial alignment. Father Thomas and Peter knew they had to act quickly, as the alignment was imminent. The entrance to the sanctuary was protected by a series of elaborate enchantments and traps designed to deter any unwelcome visitors. Father Thomas and Peter carefully studied the runes and symbols, using their knowledge of ancient rituals to decipher the protective wards. They began the process of disabling the enchantments, taking care to avoid triggering any of the deadly traps that guarded the sanctuary. As they worked, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The chasm seemed to come alive with an unsettling energy, and the stone edifice's runes glowed brighter in response. The celestial alignment was starting, and the energies of the sanctuary were beginning to awaken. The process of disabling the enchantments was complex and time-consuming. The air crackled with magical energy, and the runes on the entrance shifted and changed, testing their resolve. Father Thomas and Peter worked in unison. Their efforts focused on maintaining the delicate balance required to safely access the sanctuary. With a final incantation and the precise placement of sacred relics, the enchantments were successfully deactivated. The entrance to the sanctuary began to open, revealing a staircase that descended into the depths of the chasm. The staircase was ancient and worn, its steps illuminated by a faint, otherworldly light. Father Thomas and Peter descended into the depths, their descent marked by an eerie silence that contrasted with the chaos of the surface. The staircase led to a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with intricate murals and inscriptions depicting ancient rituals and celestial events. At the center of the chamber stood an enormous altar, upon which rested the heart of the abyss. The artifact was a pulsating, dark crystal encased in an ornate metal frame. Its surface shimmered with a dark, swirling energy that seemed to draw in the light around it. The heart of the abyss was a powerful and malevolent relic, capable of harnessing immense dark energy. The chamber was filled with ancient relics and dark symbols, each contributing to the oppressive atmosphere. The air was thick with the weight of centuries-old darkness, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the faint hum of the heart of the abyss. Father Thomas and Peter approached the altar with caution, aware that retrieving the artifact would not be straightforward. The sanctuary was heavily protected, and the dark energies surrounding the heart of the abyss would likely resist any attempts to claim it. They prepared to perform the ritual required to secure the artifact and prevent its dark power from being unleashed. The ritual involved a complex series of incantations and symbolic actions, requiring precise timing and the use of sacred relics. Father Thomas and Peter carefully followed the instructions from the tome, their movements synchronized and deliberate. The ritual was intense, with the dark energies of the heart of the abyss reacting to their efforts. As they performed the ritual, the heart of the abyss began to emit a blinding light, its dark energy fluctuating and pulsing in response to the sacred incantations. The chamber was filled with a powerful, resonant energy that seemed to shake the very foundations of the sanctuary. Despite their best efforts, the dark forces within the sanctuary began to resist. Shadows and dark entities emerged from the walls, attacking Father Thomas and Peter in a desperate attempt to protect the heart of the abyss. The battle was fierce, with the dark entities exhibiting a level of rage and desperation. Father Thomas and Peter fought valiantly, using their knowledge and skills to counter the dark forces and maintain their focus on the ritual. The chamber was a battleground of light and shadow, with the struggle intensifying as they neared the completion of the ritual. With a final, powerful incantation, Father Thomas and Peter succeeded in securing the heart of the abyss. The dark energies surrounding the artifact were contained, and the oppressive atmosphere of the sanctuary began to lift. The chamber's blinding light faded, and the dark entities retreated into the shadows. The heart of the abyss was now safely secured, its dark power neutralized. Father Thomas and Peter, though exhausted and battered, had achieved their goal. The artifact was a crucial element in their fight against the Devourer, and its secure containment would play a key role in their final efforts to vanquish the darkness. As they prepared to leave the sanctuary, they reflected on the significance of their success. The journey had been fraught with challenges and dangers, but their determination and bravery had guided them through. The heart of the abyss was a powerful tool in their quest, and they were ready to use it in the final confrontation with the Devourer and its followers. The path forward was clear, and the final battle awaited. Father Thomas and Peter were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, guided by their resolve and the knowledge that their fight was a noble and necessary endeavor. Their journey was nearing its climax, and they were ready to confront the ultimate threat and secure the world's safety. Chapter 20: The Final Confrontation. The sky was a tapestry of dark clouds and flickering lightning, as Father Thomas and Peter Hayes returned from the sanctuary with the heart of the abyss securely in hand. The celestial alignment had reached its peak, and the final battle against the encroaching darkness loomed on the horizon. The sense of urgency and anticipation was palpable, for they knew that the time had come to confront the Devourer and its malevolent forces. Their destination was the ruins of an ancient fortress, a site steeped in dark history and the center of the Dark Followers' efforts. The fortress had once been a symbol of power and grandeur, but had long since fallen into decay. It now served as the dark nexus where the remaining forces of the Devourer gathered to complete their insidious plans. The journey to the fortress was fraught with peril. The landscape had changed, with twisted trees and ominous shadows adding to the foreboding atmosphere. The dark energies that had once been concentrated in the hidden sanctuary now seemed to be coalescing around the fortress, creating a barrier of malevolence that radiated from its crumbling walls. As they approached the fortress, the intensity of the dark energy became overwhelming. The air was thick with an oppressive force that seemed to drain hope and light. The fortress itself loomed like a dark sentinel against the stormy sky, its towers and battlements silhouetted against the flashes of lightning. Father Thomas and Peter made their way through the fortress's ruined entrance, which was guarded by Dark Followers and their monstrous minions. The Dark Followers, recognizing the approaching threat, mobilized their defenses with a frenzy of activity. The atmosphere within the fortress was chaotic, with dark spells and curses being cast in an attempt to thwart any intruders. Inside the fortress, the hallways were lined with grotesque statues and dark symbols, each contributing to the sense of malevolence. The fortress had been transformed into a place of dark rituals, with makeshift altars and arcane apparatus scattered throughout. The final ritual to summon the Devourer was in full preparation, and the Dark Followers were working tirelessly to complete it. Father Thomas and Peter fought their way through the fortress, using their knowledge of ancient rituals and dark magic to counter the dark forces. The battle was fierce and relentless, with each confrontation revealing the depth of the Dark Followers' desperation. The dark energies within the fortress seemed to amplify with every step they took, and the struggle to advance was a testament to their resolve and strength. Their journey led them to the central chamber of the fortress, where the final ritual was being performed. The chamber was a grand and ominous space, dominated by an enormous altar upon which rested a dark, pulsating crystal. This crystal was the focal point of the ritual, its dark energy radiating and swirling in anticipation of the Devourer's arrival. The Dark Followers were gathered around the altar, chanting in a sinister, guttural language. Their ritual was designed to channel the dark energies and open a gateway for the Devourer to emerge into the world. The air was charged with dark magic, and the chamber's oppressive atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Father Thomas and Peter knew that they had to act quickly to disrupt the ritual and prevent the Devourer from entering the world. They began by targeting the dark crystal and the ritual components, using the Heart of the Abyss to counteract the dark energies. The Heart of the Abyss, now a crucial element in their battle, was wielded with precision to disrupt the ritual's flow. As they approached the altar, the Dark Followers reacted with alarm. The chamber erupted into chaos as they attempted to protect the ritual and fend off the intruders. Dark creatures and shadowy entities emerged from the shadows, attacking Father Thomas and Peter with a relentless fury. The battle was intense, with dark forces clashing against the light of the Heart of the Abyss. Father Thomas and Peter fought with determination, their actions guided by the knowledge they had gained throughout their journey. The heart of the abyss emitted a powerful, purifying light that countered the dark energies and disrupted the ritual. The dark crystal, once a beacon of malevolent power, began to crack and shatter in response to the heart's influence. Despite their efforts, the dark followers were determined to complete the ritual at any cost. Their chanting grew louder and more frenzied, their desperation palpable. The chamber's dark energies surged, and the ritual's progress threatened to spiral out of control. The gateway for the devourer began to materialize, its dark tendrils stretching towards the world. Father Thomas and Peter intensified their efforts, using every resource and skill at their disposal to halt the ritual. They fought through waves of dark creatures and countered the dark spells with their own sacred magic. The chamber was a battleground of light and shadow, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. In the midst of the chaos, Father Thomas recognized a crucial element in the ritual's completion, an ancient sigil that needed to be destroyed to prevent the final summoning. The sigil was inscribed on the floor of the chamber, its dark power anchoring the ritual's progress. Father Thomas and Peter directed their efforts towards the sigil, using the heart of the abyss to neutralize its dark energy. As they attacked the sigil, the dark forces within the chamber reacted violently. The chamber trembled, and the dark crystal's energy surged with a final, desperate intensity. The dark followers chanted with renewed fervor, their voices blending into a cacophony of dark power. Father Thomas and Peter pressed on, their determination unwavering. With a final, powerful strike, they succeeded in destroying the sigil and disrupting the ritual. The dark crystal shattered completely, and the gateway for the devourer was sealed. The chamber was engulfed in a blinding light as the dark energies were expelled and the ritual's effects were undone. The dark followers were thrown into disarray, their plans thwarted and their forces scattered. The chamber's oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the dark energies that had once dominated the fortress dissipated. The final confrontation had been intense and grueling, but Father Thomas and Peter had emerged victorious. As they surveyed the aftermath of the battle, they realized the full extent of their achievement. The ritual had been stopped, and the devourer's return had been prevented. The dark forces were defeated, and the world was safe from the impending darkness. The heart of the abyss had played a crucial role in their success, and its power had been instrumental in countering the dark energies. Father Thomas and Peter took a moment to reflect on their journey. The battle had been long and arduous, but their determination and bravery had seen them through. They had faced countless challenges and dangers, and their resolve had been tested at every turn. The victory was hard-earned, and the fight against the darkness had been a testament to their strength and courage. With the immediate threat addressed, Father Thomas and Peter began the process of securing and containing the remaining dark artifacts and relics within the fortress. Their mission was far from over, as there were still remnants of the dark forces that needed to be dealt with. The fortress was a dark stronghold, and it was essential to ensure that the dark energies were fully eradicated. As they worked, they felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. The journey had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they had achieved their goal. The world was safe, and the dark forces had been vanquished. Father Thomas and Peter knew that their fight had made a difference, and their efforts had preserved the light in a world threatened by darkness. As the storm clouds began to clear and the first light of dawn broke through, Father Thomas and Peter prepared to leave the fortress. Their journey had reached a significant milestone, but they were aware that the fight against darkness was ongoing. The world would always be vulnerable to the encroaching shadows, and their vigilance would be essential in safeguarding it. With the final confrontation behind them, Father Thomas and Peter set out towards the horizon, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their journey had been a testament to their courage, and their commitment to protecting the world from darkness remained unwavering. As they walked away from the ruins of the fortress, they reflected on the lessons learned and the bonds forged through their trials. The fight against the devourer had been a journey of discovery and sacrifice, and they had emerged stronger and more resolute. Their journey was far from over, and the world awaited their continued efforts. Father Thomas and Peter were ready to face the future, guided by their experiences and the knowledge that their fight against darkness was a noble and necessary endeavor. The final confrontation had been a pivotal moment, and their determination to preserve the light and safeguard humanity would guide them in the days to come. Thank you for joining us on this terrifying journey. We hope you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale and that it left you on the edge of your seat, just as it was intended. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button, share this story with fellow horror enthusiasts, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories in the future. Your support helps us bring even more dark and captivating tales to life, so make sure to stay tuned. There's always another story lurking just around the corner, ready to take you into the unknown. And remember, sometimes the darkness follows you home.